So we're going to go ahead and begin now. For the record, my name is Ricardo Arroyo. I am the District 5 City Councilor. I'm also the Chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Government Operations. Today is April 28th, 2023, and we are here today in the INL Chamber for a hearing on Docket 0454, an ordinance formally creating the Office of Food Justice and establishing a food recovery program in the City of Boston. This matter was sponsored by Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, myself, and Councilor Gabriela Coletta, and was referred to the committee on March 1st, 2023. This hearing is being recorded, is being live streamed at boston.gov, City Council TV, and broadcasted on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Fios Channel 964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made a part of the record and available to all councilors. Public testimony will be taken at the end of this hearing. If you're looking to testify today, please sign up on the sheet located near the door or email Megan Kavanaugh at Megan, MEGHAN, .Kavanaugh, KAVANAGH at boston.gov. This morning I'm joined by my council colleague Erin Murphy to give a brief synopsis of what is before us. This ordinance, as filed, will formally codify the Office of Food Justice and require generators to donate wholesome food rather than recycle it or dispose of it in the landfill, otherwise known as a food recovery program. A food donation requirement would mandate certain entities in Boston to donate edible food to food recovery organizations, food banks, and other community-based nonprofits that would otherwise be thrown away. This program serves two primary purposes: to increase food security for Boston residents and reducing the waste of excess edible food and resulting environmental harms. Introducing and passing a food donation requirement and codifying that would make Boston the first city in the country to implement that kind of a policy. As the lead sponsor, along with Councilor Coletta, introducing such legislation and implementing a donation requirement would put the City of Boston amongst the forefront of efforts to combat the environmental and economic harms of food waste, while simultaneously reducing rates of food insecurity. As a lead sponsor and the chair of the Committee on Government Operations, I want to make really clear for everybody involved and for anybody listening that this is a first draft. This is not some imminent vote. This is going to take months of ironing out the language. This is the first draft of trying to sort of put into a space what the idea for food salvage can look like, how we can codify existing practices while also enhancing those existing practices to best practices, and what ideas and things are either missing, can be tightened up, or should be inserted as we move forward will be things that come out through working sessions and through further conversations. Right now today, I want to talk about why policies like this one, which is before us, are a step in the right direction when it comes to food salvage and food waste, what this policy could look like and would optimally look like if we were able to make different parts of this move, and what would be required from different organizations, whether that's from the city, the state, federal government, private partners, and nonprofits. I also want to say that the committee has received a letter of absence from Councilor Coletta, who is ill today, and she asked us to read that into the record, so I'm going to do that now. Dear Chair Ricardo Arroyo, I regret to inform you that I will be absent from the council hearing on Docket 0454 on April 28th, 2023. I am unfortunately feeling under the weather, but will be listening in virtually. As co-sponsor of this important docket, I understand the urgency to do whatever we can to help solve our city's hunger crisis. It will require an all-hands-on-deck approach, and we are committed to being collaborative with our partners in this work. Kindly read this letter into the record. I would like to note this ordinance is a first draft, not a final draft, and helps us build a framework of what is possible at the municipal level. The response has been overwhelmingly positive in our community, and I look forward to continued conversations. Kindly read this letter into the record. That is, I'm going to take that as her opening statement, but since she's here, that is her whole statement. And as chairman, will allow Councilor Murphy to make an opening remark, and then we'll hand it off to the administration for your opening remarks, and then we'll do a question and answer session before we bring our second panel.
Great, thank you, Chair. And thank you to the administration and also the community stakeholders who are here. Food justice is so important when people go hungry, and it's often people we don't think are, right? And anyone who works at food banks or volunteers or knows that there are many people who own their home and have a job and drive a car, but then can't make the ends meet to feed their families. And so many food banks across the city and food agencies like Shirley's Pantry or Harvest on Vine and all of the, I mean, I can start naming them. Everyone is amazing. But every time I hear it time and time again, I was talking with Sister Magdalene yesterday, and she works out of the St. Monica's Food Pantry. And the lines just keep getting longer, and the families that keep coming are needing more than food, and just talking about, toiletries and dog food, and just the need that our families need across this city is, overwhelming at times. And so how can we as a council make sure that we're getting it right and supporting the food justice department here in the city? And I appreciate what you said, Councilor Arroyo, that this is a first draft, the legal part of how do we salvage food and menus and restaurants and all of that matters. So we do have to get that right. But on the other end, we have amazing organizations and people who volunteer and donate food. But I think for me, the bigger takeaway from all of this is the overwhelming need of our city residents who just don't have enough money, or don't, their money is going elsewhere with rising rent and everything else. That how can we ease that pain? Because everyone, like we talk about, everyone deserves a place to sleep in a home, and everyone definitely deserves healthy food. And I'll just end on, this morning I was at a school in West Roxbury visiting, and the kids were asked, I said, guys, we're in budget season. What is it you'd like me to advocate for? I can ask for things in the budget. And one little kindergartner raised her hand and she said, I'd really like healthy food for everyone. And I was like, you know what? I have a meeting at 11 o'clock this morning, and that's something I'm going to bring back to the council. And as we know, children usually say it best, right? They don't hold back anything. So I'll end it on that young girl's words of wisdom, that everyone deserves food, but not just food, because I've talked a lot about, as a kindergarten teacher myself for many years, it's healthy food that matters. We need to make sure that people can afford healthy, sustainable food. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. I also want to note that Councilor Louis Jen sent in a letter of absence as well, supportive of the idea of codifying food waste and food salvage protections. So I want to introduce our administration. We have with us today Reverend Mariemma White-Hammond, who's the Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space for the City of Boston. Eliza Wasserman, who's Director for the Office... Eliza Wasserman, who's the Director for the Office of Food Justice, and Laura Alves, who is also here from the Office of Food Justice, and I believe is here to sort of help answer questions, which is wonderful. And so I'm going to kick it over to y'all for openings if you have them.
Sure. Yep. So I'll just offer a few contextual opening statements, and then Eliza will add to that. So I think we want to begin by saying the EEOS Cabinet and OFJ specifically are glad to have the opportunity to connect with the Council about food recovery. We, last year, as part of our own strategic planning process, really started looking at this issue and had committed already to move on food recovery as a part of both work to address food insecurity and work to reduce food waste. It's worth noting that we have been in this conversation and really thankful to have started that and launched that in conversation and partnership with many groups, some of whom are here today, which have been leading in this space for years and who really stepped up their game in valiant and amazing ways also during COVID. And so I just think it's worth lifting up that folks have been doing this forever and also innovated in a lot of important ways in recent years. And so we want to really think about how do we grow that and how do we make sure that people have the resources that they need to build off of prior success and where we want to go. We know that food represents 8 to 10% of global human-caused emissions, and that food and other organic matter often end up in landfills and have a direct impact on accelerating climate change. Here in Boston, that number is actually even higher, as we estimate that about 25% of municipal solid waste is food. Now, I want to be really clear. There's a difference between food waste and edible food. Not all food that ends up in the waste stream is edible food. And so we are supportive of the work that's being done with our sister agency, the Streets Cabinet, to really look at how we can recover food scraps and turn them into healthy soil that can be used to grow more food and help support our communities. I do want to start by being very clear about a frame that we have within OFJ that is a small nuance, but really, really important. We want to note that food recovery is the responsibility of every eater, not just food insecure people. And so we are really focused on a food recovery system that thinks strategically about how we do food recovery for all people, and all of us participate in that. And I say that because what we have already found is that if the food recovery system is thought of as only targeting low-income people or food insecure people, that sometimes we find that quality suffers and that there's a stigma with accessing that food that makes people hesitant. Where we see the best practice is when we're thinking about how we recover for everybody and how we make sure our food system is efficient and effective. And I think about, I had my own jam business at one point, and I would always go look for the sadder looking peaches that nobody would have bought. They make really great jam. And so really thinking about, and just wanting us to think holistically, because I think that's something that we've heard from some of our partners, and when you look at the work that we find is that people, even food insecure people, are more willing and excited about accessing things that do not feel like they are only for food insecure people. So I just want to name that. Now, that being said, our office does focus particularly on food insecurity. And so our part of this conversation, the work that we're really focused on, is about strengthening pathways to connect food insecure residents with fresh, healthy, recovered food. And we have been prioritizing this goal in our strategic plan. And so in the fall, we actually created a new position and shifted some resources that we had a 0.5 FTE to focus on food recovery this year. Laura Elves, who serves in that role, and who'd previously been in the Environment Department's Zero Waste team. And so she brings some previous experience and background around this, but also wanting to hone in on this particular piece around food recovery. And so OFJ's overall mission includes a core focus on addressing inequitable food access and a focus on food justice, which pushes our systems to actually address the root causes of hunger and insecurity. So I just want to also name that we want to lift up that, and I know that Council already knows this, but it's worth saying, we also want to create a world where people can afford to access the food that they need, not just because we have emergency systems, but because we have a just world where people are paid what they deserve for the work that they do, but that we know there will always at times need a safety net to support people. So there are a few different strategies we have that we are looking at planning to expand the city's work on food recovery over the coming months and years. And these are our big picture goals. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're achieving them, but the big picture is to reduce food waste generated by public and private institutions by increasing donations of recoverable food. I want to be really clear about what recoverable food is versus food waste. 2, support improved coordination between emergency food organizations, food rescue entities, and food waste generators across the city of Boston and regionally, using approaches that destigmatize rescue food for all residents. And then 3, identify infrastructure gaps that are roadblocks to scaling distribution of recoverable food to food insecure communities. As you can see, we are taking a particular stance around food insecure communities, but we've heard already from best practices around the country that stigma is something we have to pay deep attention to, and that also quality is often stronger when people know that they'll be held accountable, not just by people who are receiving food for free. So it's just a no. What we want to lift up that are connected to this particular piece is that we're not yet in a place to design the specific approaches to achieve these strategies because we are still in the early phases of assessing the sources of food waste and recoverable food in the city. An important part of connecting individuals in need with available food supplies is understanding the local scale, the nature, and the unique conditions of food waste and food recovery. The amounts and sources of wasted food, as well as the amounts and sources of surplus food that potentially could be rescued in Boston. And we've been having really great conversations, again, with some of the folks who are already in this room, about where some of the tensions are. And data is a piece of it. Some people we know, other people we don't know. Sometimes by the time people know, the food is not necessarily in the greatest shape. Communications, there's a lot of things that prevent folks from having a full picture that we would need to create the kind of system that I think is the intention of the ordinance. So anyway, we're continuing in our own process about pulling that data together and to working with our partners to figure out how we can not just access the data, but also make it accessible to the folks who are really wanting to lean in and do this work. Want to lift up a couple of quick concerns in terms of our office and how it relates to some of the pieces. One is around enforcement. We have not imagined ourselves as a regulatory agency. And that's not how it's been structured in the past. We'd want to really talk about what that would look like if that were to be our role forward. Some questions about like our programmatic work and whether or not we'd have the ability to do good enforcement. So that's a piece. And then, again, right now we see ourselves as a team that sort of works with community to sort of open doors and think through some things and help facilitate some connections. And we would want to figure out what it would mean if that role would shift and what how that might shift our relationships with folks if we're playing a different road. We know that anywhere along the food rescue chain, there's a real challenge around quality. And so that's one of the things, I think one of our key concerns is how would that be looked at? What would our role potentially be? And then is regulation the right approach? Do we grow it from those folks who are willing and excited? Just wanting to really think about what the right approach is for a system overall and then our role in it. So I think we are really excited to be here, and what we're most excited about is the folks who are here that are in the work. I know there have been some conversations. There were some folks who couldn't quite make it, but are excited. We've gotten some letters, and I think some people have submitted a testimony. And so I think while we think there's a lot of details to really look about in terms of the specifics of the ordinance and, some concerns that we have, I think what we are excited about is, I think this is bringing to the forefront and opening up, bringing more attention to an issue that we ultimately believe needs a focus. And I also want us to, I think it is also an opportunity for people who aren't close to the food recovery system to know about the amazing work that's being done. But also, maybe there are opportunities from a logistics section, all these other, to create connections, partnerships, open up new resources, to help folks enhance and amplify their mission. And I think what we're excited about is that the ordinance clearly is trying to take a systems approach, which is what we agree with. We definitely need to take a systems approach. I think the question is, how do we find that right system for Boston and for our current conditions? And we think that there's a lot more data that we need to get there, and looking forward to a lot more conversations as those who are in the work sort of help lead us in figuring out what the right solution is for us locally. So with that, I'm gonna pass it on to Eliza, who's gonna look share a little bit more about in detail where we are, what our conversations have led us to, what we're looking at and thinking about now, and yeah.
All right. Thank you, Chair, for bringing urgency to this issue. We are at a crisis of food access in this city. The levels of food insecurity have not decreased since the acute phase of the pandemic subsided. Food prices have stayed high. The child tax credit is gone, and we are imminently facing a loss of $14 million per month in SNAP benefits that have been coming to Boston residents starting this summer. We agree that there is far, far too much edible and healthy food in our city and the region that is not going to feed residents. As we explore solutions to address this, we have a rigorous commitment to centering beneficiaries' autonomy, dignity, choice, and power, and that dignity means quality and preventing stigma, as the chief mentioned. We want to work with you to solve these challenges so that the people who call your offices and our office every day don't have to feel like they have nowhere to turn when they're choosing between healthy food and medication, or that they're letting their children down when they call food pantries who have to turn them away at times because they already have too many clients and not enough food. We know from beginning our research and listening that addressing this requires a true understanding of what the system looks like, what the gaps are, what efforts already exist, and the challenges, and I'm gonna share a little bit about that. So food rescue, sometimes referred to as food recovery, is the practice of gathering rescuable food and redirecting it for human consumption. While there's no universal criteria for rescuability, the term refers to edible food, which is safe to eat and of good quality. National data indicate that 1.7 million tons of food are rescued annually in the US, 64% of which come from retail, 27% from farms, and only 9% from restaurants and food service. And, as the chief mentioned, a substantial portion of food that is wasted is not appropriate for rescue due to spoilage, logistics, and a lack of cost effectiveness. Donated food typically moves through the food recovery system by starting at the donor level with a whole variety of types of facilities ranging from grocery stores, restaurants, catering halls, colleges and hospitals, etc., that may be able to donate items. And the food types are going to vary based on the type of facility. So grocery has a potential to secure donations, fruits and vegetables, dairy, frozen, deli, as well as non-perishables. In restaurants, 10 to 35% of wasted food occurs in the back of the house, which is where it could meet safety recommendations, as opposed to the front of the house food, which more than likely will not be appropriate for donation if customers have come in contact or it has been served. And then other institutions have the potential for prepared food to be rescued. Donated food is then picked up by an organization like folks that we have here today that rescues, transports, sometimes stores and delivers food. And these organizations rely heavily on volunteer and philanthropic support. Unlike a trash hauler or food scrap collection, there are different considerations needed to bridge donations to end sites and clients with intention. Food rescue coordinators rely on educating donors about what makes a good donation, and our efforts to scale the system need to take this into account to ensure that food is safe and nutritious when it gets to its destination, and that it can be handled properly at all points along this chain. So once food is donated, it's received by the last mile organizations, whether it's a food pantry, a homeless shelter, youth program, and these organizations may have significant storage or refrigeration needs of their own. Regardless of the type of organization, these nonprofits, in most cases, who receive the food don't have the capacity to handle situations of donation dumping where edible food is combined with food that is past its prime or otherwise not safe to eat or not culturally relevant. So we want to prevent this in any large-scale changes. And then we have other cases where food is sold rather than donated, where consumers themselves can connect to surplus food through technology solutions like apps, or locations where discounted food is sold. I want to point out that in other countries with strong social welfare systems, food recovery is often likely to happen through retail strategies such as discount or second sales. And we do have a growing number of examples here, ranging from daily table to seconds at farmers markets. Even some grocery stores are doing this, other grocery stores are doing this, the key being that this is available to all customers in a way that is not stigmatizing. So the route taken by rescuable food depends on factors including the food type and value. Nonprofit organizations in Boston, who you'll hear more from, who rescue food, vary in the volume of donations they can handle, the types of food they handle, who they partner with, how they run operationally, and what infrastructure they have at their disposal. In general, this is a logistics challenge more than anything else. So operationally, they all rely on volunteers to get their work done, heavily reliant on volunteers, and have minimal paid staffing. As far as infrastructure, some have warehouse space for storage and refrigeration, others don't. Some may have a fleet of trucks, others use food runners who may deliver by foot or their own vehicles. When it comes to financial aspects, some charge a nominal fee for a bag of groceries or charge recipient sites a fee, and one boosts revenue for farmers by connecting them to purchasers. This is a complex web of overlapping networks, and scale, geography, and transaction costs matter immensely. So for example, large batches of food, like a few dozen tons of potatoes, do need significant transport, storage, and labor resources to be effectively utilized before spoiling, but their nutritional value may last a while and can nourish a significant number of people, making it worth it. Conversely, if one bakery wants to donate a bag of 50 bagels, it is often hard to justify the labor and infrastructure costs needed to transport it to a recipient. Without the right infrastructure, keeping a minimum distance between surplus food pickup and end site locations is critical. Cold chain is important when food needs to be transported a long distance. We know that much of the surplus food coming into Boston and feeding our residents is rescued from outside of Boston. We are still learning more about why this is the case, but it clues us into what interventions may need to be developed. For example, Milan has one of the most effective and widely studied city-level food recovery systems in the world. The city identified 5 zones with the highest rates of food insecurity, and in partnership with academia and community partners and financial sector funders, created a hub for food rescue in each of those zones. So here in Massachusetts, we're fortunate to have a state ban on organics going to disposal, which means that establishments with organic waste, like food, over a certain threshold are prohibited from sending it to a landfill or incinerating over a certain amount of organic waste. Since this ban came into effect in 2014, rescue of fresh and perishable foods has increased by more than 50%, and with the recent increase in covered entities in November 2022, an additional 2,000 entities are now required to shift their organic waste, some of which may include rescuable food. This is a lever that we, the city, can build on by encouraging businesses and other sites subject to the regulation to direct as much edible food as possible to human consumption, which is what the EPA considers to be closer to the highest and best use, as opposed to compost. The state's approach has a phased-in threshold and has not pursued food rescue aggressively so as not to prompt donation of unsafe food that will ultimately be thrown out, which would shift the waste management burdens to small nonprofits. And then a new federal law, the Food Donation Improvement Act, went into effect in January. That may make it more feasible for donors in Boston to donate directly to individuals or through a nonprofit that can sell the food at a discounted price by increasing liability protections as long as they're in compliance with food safety rules. And so education about the new federal law, in addition to opportunities to build on the state organic waste ban, are ways the city can increase the volume of fresh food donations. And the state has food donation guidance documents created by Recycling Works that could be part of an education campaign. So here at the city, since the 2019 release of the Zero Waste Boston Plan, our food waste reduction investments have focused in the Streets Cabinet on enabling residents to compost food scraps through Project Oscar's 24-hour drop-off program and the city's subsidized curbside residential compost collection program, which will be expanding later this year. Building on the Environment Department's preliminary work to develop a database of commercial food waste generators and engage with those generators, our cabinet began to look at what can be done on food recovery in 2022 by outlining a roadmap of potential strategies the Office of Food Justice could take on. We used that research over the past 9 months as part of the strategic planning process that Chief White-Hammond mentioned, which with Office of Food Justice and Grow Boston together to develop the goals and strategies that you just heard from the chief. In order to pursue these strategies, this winter we applied and were accepted to participate in Food Matters cohort of cities run by National Resources Defense Council, and we are entering a 15-month partnership whereby they will provide us with technical assistance to support citywide execution of food waste reduction strategies focused on food recovery, which will enhance Boston's ability to achieve the long-term success of those strategies. We're beginning this project now with a food waste audit to estimate a baseline level of food waste in the city and assess how much surplus food could potentially be rescued for redistribution to communities using a baseline calculator that NRDC has worked with other cities on. And then will be a food rescue assessment, a study that will evaluate the food rescue landscape in Boston in partnership with food rescue organizations and identify beneficial changes to enhance and expand the food rescue system. This will help us learn from subject matter experts and peer cities about how to build infrastructure, engage partners, resource the work, and develop the right kinds of assistance for donors and food recovery organizations as well as recipient organizations. Staff from Office of Food Justice and the Environment Department have begun meeting with NRDC to identify the data to plug into this baseline calculator, and over the next several months, OFJ staff are participating in both in-person and remote learning through NRDC, through Refed Food Waste Summit, Milan Food Waste Study Tour in the next 2 months to continue building our understanding of the key levers that have enabled other cities to feasibly strengthen and scale their food recovery systems. This learning, the audit and assessment I mentioned, will allow us to build the strategies with partners that will be possible to implement and provide the right kinds and amounts of food that beneficiaries need, want, and organizations serving them can handle. Maximizing opportunities to connect appropriate surplus foods to those in need is a critical issue that can complement strategies that we are also pursuing to address underlying structural drivers of poverty and food insecurity and our broader food access work. We're excited to begin developing these strategies, and we are now deepening our insights into the effectiveness and appropriateness of existing models for the specific context we have here in Boston, so we can tailor interventions appropriately, helping to properly manage trade-offs faced by food recovery organizations between providing increased volume of food while maintaining the quality and relevance of all products we are encouraging anyone to eat. Thank you for the opportunity and happy to answer questions.
Thank you. And I believe you're here for just questions, no statement. So normally we would set timers on folks, but there's 2 of us here, so we're not going to do timers on folks. We're just going to, let's just go. So I'll touch really briefly on some things that I think will ultimately probably be different in what we pass, which is one of those is scope. We originally, as this is written, tiers things similar to the state program in which you talk about has sort of major tiers, and they do it by tonnage of waste, and that was confusing for many entities. We didn't do that, but we did tier them by the size of the entity itself. So grocery store is about 10,000 square feet. And I think of this as something that is essential for places like our public school systems, our school systems in terms of universities, our hospitals, and our grocery stores, people who generate more waste than, say, the pizza shop down the corner more regularly, so that it can be scheduled and worked into actual operation supply chains, so that there's a more regular pickup and there's a more regular understanding of this will be worth my capacity and my time. And then working out from that towards who and how. In other words, what I mean by that is I don't foresee that the Office of Food Justice will be a regulatory body. I expect you to be more of an operator. And what I mean by that is organizations that want to work to do this work would connect with the Office of Food Justice and say, where are the locations that we can partner with? Who are those partners? How do we do this? Whereas the regulation would likely be done similar to how we regulate restaurants, for instance, for quality and all those other things by folks who are trained to do that and who have existing relationships with certifying all of these locations already. And so there's a number of different outlets for how we do the regulatory aspect of that. And my vision for this, the Office of Food Justice ultimately would not be the regulatory body. They would be more of a connector. They would be an educator and a connector to organizations, from businesses to organizations, from organizations to businesses, and from end user to those places where they can receive what they need. I would just say my office has received more than anything else, more than potholes, more than speed bumps, and we get a lot of calls about speed bumps, calls for food access. Lots and lots and lots of hunger in our city. And one of the most heartbreaking things that I had to experience during the pandemic was sending them to neighborhood providers who would then call me and say, hey, we don't have capacity for this, like we are sending people away. Just last week, and then the week before that, there's a volunteer sort of neighborhood-led 501c3 that gives away food in River Street in the Hyde Park-Mattapan border, largely to the Haitian community. They have 300 meals that they give away every Thursday. They're done. It starts at 11. They are done by 11:30, and you're talking about 400 people in line, right? So they're constantly turning people away. And so I'm aware that our frontline providers often could give more if they had more. I think separate and apart from that, which is certainly centered in how I look at this, there has to be cultural, ethnic relevance. Would a Latino family or a Caribbean family or a family who has a specific kind of staples to their diet would eat and would want to eat, and what is actually treating them with respect is very different. And so making sure that our food chain supply is varied in who is giving food and how that access works. One of the things that came out of the conversations that I had with some of our nonprofits was that there's a I'll leave them unnamed, but there is a business in my community who serves largely an ethnic population. They deal with very specified ethnic foods. That was a partner for a series of time until someone in that operation believed that they were losing money by giving away food, that if they could squeeze out a few more sales, that was worth it. And so they exited that program. And so the goal here is to codify the kinds of protections that make that not an analysis that our for-profits are making when it comes to what is important and what's not important. And that goes back to treating folks with respect and putting some teeth into it. I know that the Mass DEP has this program. I'd love to know the causation correlation aspect to that donation of food, that 50% increase, because from almost every account that I could find about the state program, it was largely a failure. I'll just read you from the Globe. Officials at the State Department of Environmental Protection have promoted the ban, but enforcement has been spotty. Over the past 5 years, the department has conducted an average of 164 annual inspections, even though they had 1,700 entities subject. They issued just 39 notices of noncompliance, and in all of that time, all 5 years, they'd issued just 3 fines, which amounted to less than $5,000. And their staffing for the entire state of Massachusetts for this was a department that had just 4 employees. And so, to me, when you have those numbers and then you increase the capacity of who's eligible to this program, it's probably going to get worse. So in other words, you increase the number of eligible recipients to this state regulation that was already not being enforced at that lower number that they had to the degree that it should have been. And so that is something that I'll have conversations with the state about. We obviously have new leadership that took place in January, and so there might be a shift in priorities and how things are sort of handled, and so we will look at that. But it also doesn't mandate essentially that folks look at these pathways, and it doesn't really do a good job making sure folks are in compliance even with the food waste to compost connection. And in that article, which was several years ago, it details the composting businesses that sprung up in hope that this law would sort of keep them going, and they had a very hard time keeping their doors open on this policy. And so I look at that policy as less of a victory and more of a cautionary tale about what happens when you create something that's overly broad in scope without the ability to enforce it. And so one of the things that I want to set folks at ease with is I'm aware that at least municipally here in the United States, no city has done something similar in terms of codifying food salvage. And it's important to me that because we are a first, that it be successful. And that it's success, if that success has to be done at scale, essentially, at making sure that we're doing it at scale, that I understand that I hope that we do this in a way that's functional, because we are Boston and we are a template for the rest of the New England. And if this works here, it will be implemented in other places. And frankly, if it doesn't work here, it still might be implemented in other places. And so the hope is that we get it right.
Yeah.
And so I will be leaning on the Office of Food Justice, but also our actual stakeholders and partners who will be on the second panel to talk about sort of practical concerns. And I'll just, before I get into questions, one of the things that I have an issue with is the idea that we can't somehow regulate. So for instance, when we did the plastic bag ban, which I was not here for, one of the things that happened is we passed the fee to the consumer. So consumers pay 10 cents. I'm pretty sure Stop and Shop can afford to do what's right. I mean, they don't have to charge people 10 cents to do it. And so when we talk about food salvage and food in that food process, I think a lot of what we would have right now, because it's largely donation, because it's largely by the kindness of their heart, a lot of the burden for that falls on our nonprofits in terms of sorting, delivery, and all of those different things. And I think looking at ways in which we can have those corporate parties, those universities with large endowments, the city of Boston step in for where their city entities are a player in this. I think it's important to identify what steps can be done by nonprofits and should be done by nonprofits and should be done by folks who are doing this frontline work, and what steps, whether it's the refrigeration, whether it's the transportation, whether it's some medley of sorting, whose responsibility we can give some of these responsibilities to ease that burden on the operational setup of this. And then finally, just one last thing, this policy, much of it is essentially written in pencil. It's all very editable. The one thing that I think will likely make it to the end is the long leash before implementation. So even if we pass it, it currently has, I think, like a year and 2 years before enforcement. And that's a number that will likely stay at a far enough way for us to scale to where we need to scale it, but will largely be informed by our nonprofit partners and from folks who know how long it would take to get folks in a position to both be educated and ready for what we're asking them to do. And so in terms of that, that's that on that. Couple questions. What I heard in that very well-detailed presentation, so thank you both, was essentially that the City of Boston's food salvage programming is still in the stages of essentially trying to recover data and analyze patterns.
Yeah. So I think there's something that you stated, but I just want to pull it out because I think it's really key. So one of the things that we've heard, from what we understand, nowhere in the country are people hitting the scale that they want. So there are people doing amazing work everywhere, including
here. Yeah.
And if you sit down with the folks who are in that work, you will hear people's deep frustration with the fact that they know more would be better. That there's
there. That
no
it's
lack
there,
of need, right?
Like
Yeah. So I think one of the big pieces that I've heard, though, that is that even when you have people who are doing this willingly, there are some real challenges around quality.
Yep.
And so what the concern is, if you put a whole bunch of people into the system who didn't choose to be there, that they'll be significantly worse on those issues of quality.
Yeah, and I've heard that. And the thing that I would say about that is, if many of our restaurants didn't have to do the standards for cleanliness and all of the things that they have to do, they certainly wouldn't.
Yeah.
But they do. And so I think the same kinds of restrictions that we
I
look
would
at
hope.
for that.
I hope they would.
Well,
they wouldn't want us
let me
to
be more
have-
clear. The vast majority of them still do.
Well, but, I mean, I think
It's not
in
it's
that
not a
instance,
catch-all.
they know that if they don't do some of those things,
There's a
if
punishment.
I throw
there's
up
a
after I
penalty.
leave your restaurant,
There's a
I'm gonna get
follow-up
on Yelp and
inspection.
tell a
Yeah,
lot
and I
of
think
people. Yeah.
and I think that aspect of it, which is hoping that people would do what's right, but having something there
Right.
in the case that they
Yeah,
don't.
yeah.
And that is something that I will explore both with your office.
Yeah.
But also with what our regulatory powers are. So for instance, we could shut restaurants down. We can do a bunch of different things based on whether or not they're following the cleanliness and the health and regulation codes that we're asking them to do. On this case, and I just want to be clear on this too, because we're talking about restaurants, I don't expect that this pilot program is going to extend to restaurants. I think that it's probably just, frankly, unwieldy at that level, because we're talking about so many stops individually, so many deliveries individually, so many things that we would have to sort. I just operationally can't see how we would get to there. I mean, maybe I get surprised and people say, no, we could operationally do that. I just don't believe operationally we can get to the place where your local pizza shop or your local restaurant is a part of a program like this. Not initially, not with what I'm talking about. But I do think there's a space where we can get to hospitals, schools, universities, and large grocery chains where we are requiring them to not give us spoiled or rotten food, and there's ways to sort of follow up on that and have that be a thing. Because, as a daily check, we'll hear more from our second panel, but I'm pretty sure they do a lot of that sorting as well. And if there's an intake or an increase where they're seeing these folks they don't care, and they're giving us all kinds of spoiled food, they're able to flag that for us, even if we have. So in other words, there's reporting systems that we can set up where we know that we can get flashed to, hey, there's a real problem over here because X university or X public school or X whatever it is giving us the worst of what they've got. They do not care. And then there has to be some regulatory implementation that we can do for that. And so one of the things about that is exploring how we can get to that.
Yeah.
And I don't, just to be 100% upfront, I do not foresee y'all doing that. And so it's not going to be the Office of Food Justice that's like calling them and being like, you're out of code. It's going to be folks who already do that. And so it's just figuring out what and how we do that, what the budgetary aspects of that are. But I believe budgets are values. I think there's no greater need on my district level that I have than hunger. I expect that's probably true of most. I know Gabriela Coletta is not with us today, but the SNAP gap is large in East Boston. And so when we're talking about hunger, that's a citywide problem. It should be treated like the problem it is. And back to stigma, it is an insidious problem in that people who have it are often afraid to let you know, because in our society, we unfortunately put stigmas on folks that if you can't feed your family, that's your fault and not the fault of our systems or what's happening around you. And so those are the kinds of things that I want to make sure we deal with. That stigma stuff, there's an education aspect to that too. A lot of this is going to require budget, but luckily you're at the council where we get to make determinations on budget. And I would love to figure out, and this is why this will take some time to get to a final, what that looks like in a reasonable way, what the scope can be, what the scale can be, what's realistic operationally, what would be required from all of our partners. And so I want to head over to my council colleague, Council President Flynn has joined us. I will have one question, though, about one thing before we go to a second round, which is our public schools. When I introduced this, I started receiving text messages from teachers in our public schools almost immediately of individually sealed milk, fruits just filled, trash cans filled to the brim with all of these sealed foods. I'm not talking about food scraps, which is like, somebody took a bite out of an apple, that's different, that's composting, or the leftover portion of a meal. I think that should go to composting. That's not what the scope of this is trying to get to. But we have a new contract with City Fresh Foods. I've seen City Fresh Foods' packaging. It's individually packaged, it's already labeled. It's frankly higher quality food than we usually have. What programming, if any, or relationship, if any, does BPS have with the Office of Food Justice as it relates to their food waste?
Yeah, so I feel like it's a mind meld because we've been talking a lot about this in in these sort of early conceptual stages of strategy, because we also are starting to implement good food purchasing program, our office, with BPS, and we imagine that there may be, once we move from kind of big picture goals to implementation opportunities to partner similarly. We, because of Laura's existing work on zero waste, have been coordinating and looking at ways we might be able to support the BPS Zero Waste and Sustainability Project Managers new pilot compost program that they've started in 4 schools. And as part of that, have started to think about, are there ways that food waste audits could be introduced? So like one concept is around measuring the just to even first gather the data, because the logistics cannot be based on anecdotes. The logistics have to be based on volume. So the sort of like, no pun intended, lowest hanging fruit of the volume of leftover whole fruit is one idea that we've started to kick around with BPS, between the Food and Nutrition Services and the sustainability team. I will flag, and we've also been in contact with a couple of other districts in Massachusetts who are also looking at starting some of this work with nonprofit partners who do food rescue, is that there are a lot of seemingly illogical, from a food rescue perspective, federal regulations around
We talked about this.
what can actually be rescued from schools without jeopardizing the federal meal reimbursement process. I cannot tell you the details of it right now, but that, is why this nationally is a harder nut to crack than it should be around schools, that, could take longer. I also think from an implementation perspective, how this is set up and whose responsibility it is within a school would be complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is it goes back to this key question of who does the sorting work. And one of the big challenges is that even folks that want to help don't want to take on the sorting work. And that can be, so they sometimes are just like, here's the aggregate, go, right? And like, could be good stuff mixed in with questions. So really, so figuring that out. So I think the other layer to this is that the White House did bring some folks together around issues of like homelessness and food insecurity. And so we are hoping that is going to create some space for some deeper conversations. We've remained, connected with that conversation. And again, we're not the only folks looking at it. I think the other thing that we're trying to do, and this, sometimes when you go look elsewhere, they have different regulations, et cetera. But Laura, we signed up to be part of NRDC's, the National Resource Defense Council, has a cohort of folks that they are convening from across the country around the question of food waste. And they will be taking a trip to Milan. Laura lucked into going to see what it looks like when it's done best. And then that will give us a lot to work from.
And when is that trip?
June.
Yep, last week in June.
Great time.
Yeah, I was like, can I sign up for the cohort? Is it too late? But anyway, so I think obviously they're going to have different national laws, they're going to have different local laws, but we're hoping that we can see how they're working through some of those pieces.
The operational facility.
Right, and the fact that the White House has convened people to talk about this could create an opening. It is also worth noting that BPS has brought on a new director of nutritional services, and we're excited that creates some opportunity to do some deeper conversation and relationship building with BPS. And this is not the only thing that we're looking at that has a BPS component, so we have been investing in that relationship with BPS Nutritional Services and hope that can be part of it. But it is challenging, like for instance, the individually wrapped piece, I think is something that people do to comply federally, except like there's a lot of kids who are lactose intolerant. They're never gonna drink that milk, but you're not allowed to say, let each child take what they need, because that's not, federally.
We talked about those things, and so I'll save the rest of my questions for round 2 so that my council colleagues can go. Councilor Murphy, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your presentation. And as you know, when I worked with your sister and have that lens as a classroom teacher, so I'm glad you brought that up. So I'm definitely going to get to, that was one of the things I wanted to talk about, the food we waste and the shame we put on children in our Boston public schools absolutely needs to stop. But I'm also always amazed at how the internet is listening to us, because when I just opened my phone, I got Fenway Cares. I wrote it down, Boston Food Forest, which is interesting, that's a new one, and Community Servings were in my feed, but those are all great organizations, so the internet is listening to our conversation, so I guess that's not a bad thing, right? So I'm thinking I'll start with the schools, right? There's rules, but then there's common sense. And now that I'm on this side of the policy side, I think it's very important that we do address the wasted food in our Boston Public Schools. So when I first started teaching, and we would put kids into 3 lines, right? One would be the lunchbox from home, right? So, you had your Holly Hobby lunchbox. I think that was mine back in 1974, right? And then the kids who got free or reduced lunch, which of course you had to give them a tag, like a piece of paper, and it would get dirty as the year went on. And then the kids who were going to buy lunch. And so you were already walking down the hallway to the cafeteria in a very segregated way, which I'd never liked, and I would always try to just do it my way, and would sometimes, if not often, butt heads with the cafeteria workers. But then the other thing that bothered me, not every school, as you know, our smaller schools get their food delivered every day, and we have ovens that heat them. But there are many schools that cook on site. And so my years at the Murphy School, the food was cooked on site. And if you didn't have money to pay for the school lunch, they were required to feed you, is what they would say. But they would give you what we always called the mystery lunch, the bag. But then the mom and dad still got the bill. So I would always argue, well, give them the nice warm lunch, the hot lunch that you're cooking, because you're going to bill the family anyway. Which always just socially, it was just not a good thing. And then we got to the point where lunch was free for everyone, which is great. But then that is the policy you were talking about. And sometimes it's just kind of mind-boggling. So you could get a free lunch, but if you brought lunch from home and all you wanted was the milk, the lunch monitor will get in trouble, the manager, which is shocking. But she can't just give you the milk, she has to give you the whole lunch to get the milk free. And if you're not taking the whole lunch, because there were parents who then would get a bill for like $20, and they're like, I thought milk was free. It's like, oh, but only if you also get the food. So that's why the barrels are overflowing. And this isn't just one school doing it wrong. That's a system-wide policy, which when I tell people, or when I used to tell people, they wouldn't believe me. So I was the teacher, and I would make sure I went down after every lunch ended, and I was in the barrel. And I was pulling out the wrapped, like you said, Councilor Roy, it's clean, it's wrapped. And I had a basket, and I had a beautiful bowl, and it was fresh fruit, and kids from other classrooms would come by and get it because it was just being thrown away. And the shame on the kids, which I think really needs to stop also, is you mentioned we can't then give it to nonprofits, but we don't need to. We can send it home with kids in their backpacks, and we should be. And we saw through the pandemic, which everyone who works in a school already knew was true, that many kids, when it's school vacation or it's Friday or Monday's a holiday, they're going an extra day without food. So if there's any food that's safe and clean that we can just discreetly put in someone's backpack, should just be able to happen. So we definitely have to look at that policy of the rule and then the common sense and the wastedness of it, because there's just a lot of good food that should not go wasted, especially when we know. And then to get to the food pantry side, there is a more need than we have the food for. And I've been at the food pantries where people are showing up and they don't even realize you have to sign up, you have to show a license, but it is important. At first I'm like, well, this seems a little intense, but then I realized that they already have 200 families coming at noon, and if you give the food to the people who showed up at the first round, they're not going to have enough because there just isn't enough. So trying to figure out how we make sure that every food pantry that's doing this amazing work, like kind of checking in, like, what is it you're missing? Because I know that some do reach out, like, we need eggs, we need milk, or we know that next weekend we're going to need more families And like we'll hear in the next panel, the numbers of families that are not just coming once in a while, that are coming every week or twice a week to these food pantries is increasing. So the need is there. And I'm also thinking about, if you know, like the Katie's Closet program, which is in many. I hope someday it will be in all of our Boston public schools. But they set up a space in the school and have clothes, and you go shopping. It's set up in such a respectful way. And it's not just the clothes now, they also have many shelves of toiletries. So if a child needs a sweatshirt or a pair of pants and there's sizes and they're clean, and it's just a good way to distribute it. In many neighborhood associations and churches, you see now their basement or there's a closet that used to store supplies through the pandemic, and they've kept it now, is the same idea where you kind of go shopping for your own food, right? So there's such a need, and to make sure that we're not just thinking of the food pantries, which not to take away for their great work, but there's so many other organizations where they're connecting with families. So if the family asks, they just know there's a need. They're coming for one thing, but we know they also need some food to go home with. So kind of thinking outside the box. And also we taught the stigma. I think it's like racism, right? We combat it with education. And how do we get it in a curriculum? I'm often surprised, like we don't teach financial literacy. We need food to eat, to live, survive, and we don't talk and teach about it. We don't teach kids how to cook and what healthy food means. So, but there are organizations like ADSL has their cooking classes, the base. The last time I was there, I went to visit their financial literacy class, and they have healthy snacks, and they have menus, and you bring it home and teach your mom and dad, or that you just learned how to like make healthy salsa and why it matters to eat healthy. So I think the education part of it needs to also be put into our schools and other, starting at a young age about the importance of it. And lastly, the unions. We talked about the need for refrigeration, and like IBEW last year like donated their time to Shirley's Pantry because she got a donation of a freezer, but she kept blowing fuses, but they went and they upgraded the electrical work. So thinking outside the box, I know the Carpenters Union went to the Brett Food Pantry, and they made shelves so that they could, store their food easier in a better way. So there's a lot of organizations that want to help and sometimes don't see themselves as someone who can help in the food industry, like food service. So I think reaching out to unions and others to like step in and help and give their services is important, because one of the things you hear is there's a call that there's something we can donate, but they might be like, I don't have room in my freezer. So how do we make sure we're buying freezers and refrigerators, but also making sure that they have the electrical capacity to keep them running and keep the food fresh. So not really any questions, just know that it's a lot of work, but I just want to hope that we can make smarter policies so it's more common sense, and it's in making sure that children and families aren't shamed, because it shouldn't be the teacher, like, not that I mind, and I'll go back in it tomorrow, I don't care, but it should be that even though, there should be no fear that the cafeteria manager is going to get in trouble because she knows there's clean, safe food. So how do we just look at that and talk about things that just need to change so that nobody feels like they're going to lose their job over feeding kids? So thank you.
Thank you for raising that. Those are all excellent points, especially the union addition aspect to that, and ways that they can come in that aren't traditionally around food service. Councilor Flynn, Council President Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the important ordinance on this issue, and I certainly support it. And I guess my question is to the panel, and thank you for the important work you're doing. I guess my question to the panel is, how will this impact, or how do we continue to reach residents that need food, that are living in public housing, and our immigrant neighbors that may not speak English, but are we also including communication with language and communication access and Office of Immigrant Advancement, working close with the BHA? Can you talk a little about the partnerships that would need to take place, city departments working with city departments?
Yeah, I mean, I think our goal is really actually to try to drive food to where people have already feel comfortable and safe going. I think we know that there are many shelters, many food pantries that have actually leaned in to supporting specific populations, where what we're trying to figure out is how do those folks get what they need to actually be able to serve people, because it is heartbreaking to turn people away. I think one of the things that we're wanting to look at specifically, and I'm just saying wanting because it's on our list of like important things, we just don't have, I can't tell you like how we're gonna get there yet, but the importance of culturally appropriate food is just huge. We know that many pantries are doing the best they can, and most people get their sources from sort of this centralized space, and there's really an underrepresentation of certain kinds of food that people really want. And so that's a real challenge, and that's one of the pieces we're trying to look at. I think, as Eliza mentioned in her statement, we know that a lot of the food is coming from outside of the city into the city and then being distributed. This is a conversation we're also in with the Office of Food, the Grow Boston and the Office of Food Justice working together, because part of it is there's less of the culturally appropriate food being grown, because that would be grown if folks from those cultural communities could get access to land. There are folks who want to grow Asian greens. There are folks who want to grow some of the folks. Now, some things we can grow, I just want to know, and some things we can't. Mm-hmm. Like, we're not.
I can't get my avocado.
Until climate change goes in a direction that we probably all don't want to see, we're not going to be able to grow mangoes here, but there are other things that people are used to eating that are culturally appropriate that we could do. And so I think our role is less in the direct facing conversations with folks that are looking for food, and more of how do we support the amazing groups and organizations that are providing that, who would give more food if they had access to more. Our role is to help them get access to more, and we are taking a specific look at some of the culturally appropriate foods that people say they really want. Because another thing that people sort of lift up is sometimes, and it's gotten so much better now than it was, but there was a time where we sort of just handed people a bunch of staples that couldn't necessarily make a meal if you put them all together. Like, here's some tuna fish and some peanut butter and some milk. What would you create out of that? I have no idea what kind of meal would bring those things together. And people have done a lot of work to try to get away from just doing it that way, to mixing in things, and that you have a bag, that bag could come together to make some meals. But yeah, so I think we see ourselves as the in-between, the support, the amplifier of folks who are doing that work on the ground, and less of the direct service to communities. I will say, though, that we do also, in some of our other programs, for instance, like our farmers markets, coupons, are very much targeted to folks that we know have trouble receiving resources from other programs, undocumented folks who have language barriers. And so we, in those particular instances, again, we're still working with partners on the ground, but again, our policies are about how do we make sure that folks that may be slipping through the cracks in a variety of different ways are also getting the support that they need. Lisa, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add, echoing that we're sort of want to be a resource where we're finding common patterns that we can provide support at either neighborhood or citywide scale. But I did just want to mention, because Tom is here, that we have, just on two of those pieces, that actually we have been able to support, thanks to some budget funding from Councilor Coletta, to food pantries in East Boston and Charlestown, and our food security design fellow, as part of ARPA funding grant, is working with Harvest Unbound Food Pantry, who is trying to tackle exactly the issues, some of the issues you mentioned, Counselor, around language access, particularly at their food pantry. I don't know if you're going to get to hear from Tom
Yes.
if you want to testify.
He's on the next panel.
Great. So he's got all the details on that, but I know that is something he's working on, particularly to improve the pantry's work with pantry folks, residents who his primary language is Chinese. I'm not sure if it's Mandarin or Cantonese. And that's ongoing, and that we also, with ARPA funds, we're able to support a culturally relevant foods mobile pantry that the Y is going to be setting up. They've been waiting for the truck for, I believe it's at least 9 months now. Hopefully in the next month.
Yeah.
They keep sending us updates about the truck. But basically the idea is that we'll address, one sliver of ways to provide culturally relevant foods, as well as addressing, giving people the choice. And so that mobile food pantry, they're working around what sites, whether it's BPS schools, BHA sites, are the different locations that mobile food pantry will be located at different, on a specific schedule.
Thank you. Just on a side note, my wife and I visited the women's lunch place 2 weeks ago. Our friend works there as a volunteer, Vivian Lee. I don't know if you know Vivian. You know Vivian. But they have a wonderful outreach to the Asian community, to the Chinese community. And they have, in most of the Chinese that do come in there, speak Cantonese, but they do have culturally appropriate food. For most of them are seniors too. But it's a wonderful program, and they do incredible work supporting predominantly this immigrant community. Most of them don't speak English, but what a wonderful program it is, seeing them come in and get healthy food, culturally appropriate food, and just really have. It was one of the highlights of my day, seeing how this nonprofit works with residents of Boston, especially our immigrant community. So just want to say thank you to the Food Access Program in Boston for the important work you do in helping so many people throughout Boston. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I want to, and out of respect for our next panel's time, move to our next panel. I just want to put this in the air for BPS, since it keeps coming up, and I do think from all of our city agencies, they are one of the ones that deal with food on a more regular basis. I'm sure Age Strong might have some other ones might as well, but they absolutely do. They happen to have a lot of the things that my direct line providers would love. They have refrigeration, freezers, kitchens, cafeterias. And one of the things that I think we could explore eventually, as we start to untangle what federal laws dictate what and what we do, is all of our schools are set up in regions, and creating a hub spot of maybe a school that is most equipped to do this, where, for instance, I have that neighborhood organization that every Thursday does this. If we had an every Saturday, you could go to East Boston High, and all of this serves as a hub for where food from BPS or other facilities are going to, and we partner with a nonprofit or contract, because we should pay people for their work, with a nonprofit to do that. I think we have the facilities, which is a major aspect of this. We have the ability to transport, because we're already transporting these meals to these schools to begin with. We should look at what would it take operationally for BPS to set something up. We know the importance of food for our BPS families, because we open up during all kinds of emergencies to make sure families can get food. It also serves as, and it would serve for more than just the BPS families, but it would be something where BPS families know they can go here, but so do everybody else, and it would be a good way for the city to give people access to information on other services, because it's in a city-led sort of space. And I don't know that we do that in many of our facilities. For instance, I know that BCYF in Hyde Park has a food pantry that runs out of it. So we do have similar things. And so I think that's just something to explore, more likely in a partnership with BPS and appropriate folks there. that's a different agency entirely. But I think as we look at it, I think a lot of the operational things, which I think are really where the difficulties for a lot of this stuff, like making this stuff real, is operational difficulties. In some cases, it's crazy federal laws.
Well, there may be, I wanted to lift this up because a teacher had mentioned to me that a slight loophole, which is if the children donate the food themselves.
So maybe education on how that could be done.
If you, for instance, created, this isn't the orange bowl. If you're not eating your orange.
And you would like to
you
give
can
it.
put it in the orange bowl. This is then I'm not positive this, but the teacher said that given what she knows about the rules, if the children were to donate it, and I think the thing is, to Councilor Murphy's point, you would want, first and foremost, for children who go to that school or families that are at that school to know that you could grab something and you could educate the children, like if you grab something and you're gonna eat it, you're preventing this from going into the trash and you're helping the planet. So instead of stigmatizing the children that they're taking food, you empower all the children to think about whether or not they would, if they're gonna eat the food, don't take your food.
Yeah,
that
don't
you're
give away food
not
that you-
eat.
yeah.
But if you take food that you're going to eat, that's great. And then again, that piece of kids who may not need it financially and kids who do, if they're both taking it, the kids who do really need it are less stigmatized in choosing to do so. Now, you might still have food left over at the end, right? And so
Yep.
then the question is, what do you do there? But I think that was an idea that, she and I were like talking about
I
that
like it.
could be a workaround while we're waiting for the federal government to change its rules, which
Could
I'm
take
not
a
sure
while.
that I want to wait
Yeah,
on that.
yeah.
to
That's
get
how I
done.
feel about sending things to the legislature. So it's the same thing. And so I thank you for your time. I think this is something we can definitely look at. Food as a sort of building block for life is essential, but in all different aspects of how people get through their days, through their health, through their long-term health outcomes, this stuff matters. And so thank you very much for the work that you're all doing on a daily basis in one of the most important sort of departments and cabinets that we as a city have. That's why you're here all the time.
I do feel like I live here a little.
Yeah, we got you an easy pass on the line. So thank you very much. I want to call up our second panel now. We have 4 seats for the 4 of you. Liz Miller, who's the Community Relations Manager at Love and Spoonfuls, along with Sean Ahern, who's the Operations Manager at Love and Spoonfuls. Sandra Nijar will be online when she is here. Tom McDonald, Director of Harvest on Vine. And Alana Mallon, who's the Vice Mayor for the City of Cambridge and the Government and Community Relations Director for Food for Free in Cambridge and Somerville. We'll give folks a chance to set up, and then if folks have an opening or thoughts of what they've heard or what they're hearing, or want to sort of have an ongoing conversation, that'd be great. And then I'll have questions, and then Councilor Murphy might have some questions. You've seen how this works. Sometimes questions look more like statements because they are. And then we work our way through. Hey, Tom. And so I have no particular order for this. I know we have 2 folks from Love and Spoonful, so I don't know if you both would like to speak or if you have already agreed on who's speaking. But we will start from, technically, that is your right, but to my left. So from here all the way down in order, just name, if I got your name wrong, which I don't think I did because I made them give it to me phonetically, organization, and then anything you would like to say as an opener before we go to sort of this.
Great. All right, get us going. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Liz Miller. I am a resident of Boston and I'm testifying here today in my capacity as Community Relations Manager for Love and Spoonfuls. Sean Ahern is with me, our Senior Director of Operations. We're here to express our gratitude for your interest in tackling food waste and food insecurity through your proposed ordinance, but we're also here to share some of our high-level concerns with the proposal and how we see some important opportunities to strengthen it going forward. Love and Spoonfuls is the largest food recovery organization in New England, both in terms of food rescued as well as communities served. We were founded over 13 years ago in the city of Boston, and our largest footprint is still here within the city. Our professional staff works 5 days per week in a fleet of temperature-controlled vehicles to safely pick up and transport still good mostly perishable food, a lot of produce, meat, dairy, that would otherwise be discarded from retailers like grocery stores, wholesalers, and farmers markets across the state. We distribute that food same day to local nonprofits serving people facing food insecurity, including pantries, shelters, and crisis centers, senior centers, after-school programs, and more. Last year, we prevented over 4.3 million pounds of food from going to waste, which equates to 3.4 million meals across the state, and 2 million pounds of that food went to agencies in Boston alone. Food recovery now more than ever is a critical means to tackling the issues of wasted food and food insecurity. 38% of food in the United States goes unsold or uneaten. Meanwhile, here in Massachusetts, 1 in 6 residents is facing food insecurity, so there's a pretty significant gap there. We applaud Councillor Arroyo and Councillor Coletta for your interest in strengthening food recovery in the city, and we do look forward to collaborating with the City Council and the Office of Food Justice to refine the scope of this proposal. We want any municipal food recovery efforts that stem from this proposal to prioritize food donations that are safe, nutritious, and culturally relevant, which we've been talking about a lot. Create a program that's logistically feasible, include any regulatory requirements that are truly enforceable, as we've discussed already here today, and most importantly, center the people who will be receiving the food through this program. As a point of fact, food recovery in the city is not new. 11 Spoonfuls has been at the forefront of food recovery efforts in Boston and across the state since 2010. We work with over 100 city food vendors and nonprofit recipients to distribute the food we rescue to people who need it, including in the communities referenced in the ordinance, Dorchester, Mattapan, Hyde Park, and Roxbury. But to be clear, this is a good opportunity to codify the city's commitment to food recovery as a priority. So we do aspire to help inform the city's path forward, and the opportunities we see to refine this proposal are to ensure safe, high-quality food donations. As written, this proposal could subject food retailers and food service workers, some of whom may have no experience with food recovery, to make determinations about what excess edible food is appropriate for donation. So we really would like to share our best practices on determining a reasonable runway for vendors subject to this ordinance to receive training around that. Also exploring whether a regulatory approach to increasing food donations is the best one, and if so, whether it's enforceable. So we have questions about to what degree this ordinance will align with the existing Massachusetts organics waste ban, which incorporates recommendations from NRDC. To what degree is it duplicative? What does this mean to businesses subjected to both? Is the city prepared to hold violators accountable, and how? These questions all require clear answers before moving forward. Ensuring food recovery efforts are logistically feasible. We have several concerns about the potentially significant operational burdens on food retailers, food rescues, and the receiving nonprofits that would have to contend with an influx of donations without that ramp-up time, with ample ramp-up time and capacity building. We hope to work together so that nonprofit beneficiaries and their end recipients can truly make good use of the food that they receive, because if not, the food will go to waste, which is what we're aiming to avoid here. Mm-hmm. And finally, value food recovery and center people. We want to make sure that food sourced through this program has people's dietary and cultural needs and tastes in mind, that beneficiary nonprofits can use the food we provide very effectively. Incremental or haphazard donations could jeopardize the value of food donated through Food Rescue in Boston and negatively impact the perception of food recovery among beneficiary organizations and the people that they serve. 11 Spoonfuls has made great strides in the past 13 years to ensure that food recovery meets the needs of our nonprofit beneficiaries and their clients, and is centered on high-value, nutrient-dense food offered with dignity. Any successful municipal food recovery program must meet these tenets to be successful. We're eager to maximize the positive impacts of food rescue in the city of Boston for all Bostonians and see the potential for legislation to do so. We urge the councilors to continue to learn from and be informed by the end recipients of the food we provide, by the food assistance programs that serve them, and by the food recovery organizations like 11 Spoonfuls. We're poised to work with you to ensure a sustainable approach to food recovery in Boston. And we thank you for your time and consideration today.
Thank you so much. I believe we next have, if you can introduce name and then whatever opening. And there are no timers on you. So however long that takes. If that wasn't readily apparent by the first panel, we have no timers.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Chair Arroyo and the honorable members of the Government Operations Committee for inviting us to participate in this hearing for Docket 0454 today. My name is Alana Mallon, and I'm the Community and Government Relations Director at Food for Free, a local food recovery and food access organization. Food for Free believes that fresh, healthy food is a human right, and we work tirelessly to ensure that we are providing targeted food to the most vulnerable and food insecure in the communities that we serve of our over 130 partner agencies. These partners include schools, community colleges, homeless and domestic violence shelters, food pantries, and more. Last year, Food for Free recovered over 2 million pounds of food that was not only diverted from the landfill and thus not contributing to our greenhouse gas emissions, but went directly to residents in need. We recover food in two distinct ways. The first is we recover fresh produce and other items through the more traditional food recovery avenue, from grocery stores, from produce markets, food warehouses, and others. This food is distributed the same day to our partner agencies, as many do not have the required refrigeration to store fresh produce, and we're able to deliver this food when they need it, right for their clients. Last year, we served 27,000 individuals with the equivalent of 1.1 million meals for our traditional food recovery program. The second way that we recover food is we recover dining hall and hot bar food for our Heat and Eats program. This program repurposes recovered, prepared food into single-serve frozen meals, which are distributed to our partner agencies whose clients may not have access to a kitchen or other ingredients, and for whom a quick, healthy, balanced meal is what's needed. These single-serve microwavable meals contain a protein, a starch, and a vegetable. This year, we've recovered 25,000 pounds of food from over 20 university and institutional dining halls, including Boston University, Brigham and Women's Hospital, Emmanuel College, and Mass General Hospital. From that recovered food, we have made 38,000 meals so far this year, and 36,000 of those meals have been distributed to partner agencies. Our food recovery reach is extensive, and our innovative Heat and Eats program is oversubscribed. We have 22 Boston-based recipient agencies who receive regular deliveries of recovered food from Food for Free. These 22 agencies include Bunker Hill and Roxbury Community Colleges, East Boston Harborside Community School, East Boston Community Soup Kitchen, ABCD Alston Brighton, Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology, and Brighton High School, just to name a few. Currently, we do not have enough food donors to meet the needs of our partner agencies. Our organization has grown exponentially during the COVID pandemic, and the need for additional equipment and staffing has been necessary to meet the tremendous needs that still exist post-pandemic. We are challenged by the lack of prepared foods to recover, as well as the necessary funds to expand our organization to meet the needs in Boston should this ordinance be passed. Additional refrigerated and freezer trucks, staff, and space will be needed to recover and redistribute the additional food generated by this ordinance. Funding for food recovery work remains a challenge, particularly once the American Rescue Plan Act dollars run out at the end of 2024, just as the ordinance is poised to be enacted. We would love the opportunity to work with this body to ensure these challenges can be remediated, and we can deepen our impact by expanding our prepared food recovery efforts in Boston for our Heat and Eats and traditional food rescue programs. Along with the other food recovery organizations that are here today and those who are here online or with us in spirit, we believe that quality is dignity, and each of our organization lives up to that high bar each and every day. It is critical to all of us that donated food is of good quality and appropriate for the partner agencies that we are working with to connect to their clients. We all strongly support the donation of high quality, fresh and edible food, and with your help, we look forward to magnifying those efforts. Again, thank you for inviting me here to speak on this matter. I'm happy to answer any questions as they come forward.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
Hi, I'm Tom McDonald from Harvest on Vine Food Pantry in Charlestown. We're part of St. Mary St. Catherine Parish. We started the food pantry in 2003 with 7 families. We now have over 700 families on our database. We serve food twice a month, 3 times now, and we probably give out pretty close to 20,000 pounds of food a month. I'd like to thank the Boston City Council for appropriating funds to us that we can buy a freezer which we really need. And I'd like to thank the Office of Food Justice. They've just been wonderful to us, and just as a kind of a person on the ground, it's so important for us to have an Office of Food Justice here, because it kind of gives you the feeling you're doing something that matters when you get the city behind you like that. What we try to do is we moved from, we started out, we'd have pre-bagged food that we'd hand out to the clients, hand them we didn't have a refrigerator, freezer, or anything back then. It was all dry goods. Today we have freezers, refrigerators, and we were encouraged by the Greater Boston Food Bank to move to a client choice shopping type of situation, where we'll have like a long table like this, we'll have different stations of food on it. And if the client wants food, if they want it, they take it. And if they don't, they pass. And we've moved from mostly what I'd call non-perishable foods to mostly perishable foods now. Fruits, vegetables, poultry, milk, eggs, anything we can get our hands on that really, and the way we find out what people really want, and we have, I think there's 17 languages spoken in the neighborhood that we serve, is you put out the food, and if it's gone, you know it's something they want. And if it's left over, you know they don't want it. So it's kind of trial and error. And we're going to be getting some help with the Office of Food Justice is going to get us some help with interpreters. The best way I can communicate usually is with a smile. You know, the language barriers are that high, or if the mothers have children with them, they can interpret. So we're so excited to get some interpreters that can help us. And we also are looking to move everything outside. You know, during the pandemic, we did everything outside. And we've kept doing that, but when it's raining, it's not bad if it's snowing, but if it's raining, you can't get the food wet. You know, and so we're getting an overhang built, you know, and I was talking to Councilor Murphy, she might be able to help us with getting some electrical stuff, you know, which we really need, for the freezers and the refrigerators and things, and probably get some better lighting, things like that. So the volunteers we have, and we're the beneficiaries of your programs, you know, so we're kind of, you know, loving spoonfuls, and you know, so thank you very much for your food. And, you know, we try to create an atmosphere of what I would call solidarity with the poor. Not this idea of we're serving you. It's no, we're all one community here. Let's try to help each other get through. And the people who really get served are the ones on, you know, this so-called volunteer side of the table, you know. So we have, I'd say anywhere from 35, 40 volunteers at each distribution. Last Tuesday, we had, I'd say roughly 750 families came through. I'm sorry, 175 families came through. And we had enough for everybody. We ran out of a couple of items, but basically, you know, we had enough. So the Harvest and Vine is doing great, and we get great support from the city, from the state, from the Greater Boston Food Bank. They're always advising us on the types of food. And we get funding so I can buy produce, I can buy fresh milk. And this is what the families really want, you know. And we're very lucky to be in the position we're in, and we're very excited about getting this new freezer, which will really, I'd say Tuesday we probably gave out about 600 pounds of chicken. But see, that takes up all my freezer space, so now I'll be able to get fish, frozen fish, things like that, that we can really give the families what they want. Thank you.
Thank you all. You said makes you feel like your work really matters. Your work, it matters tremendously. And so I'm incredibly grateful to all of you for the work that your organizations do, but also you individually. Just want to start there. I think the other thing that we all share in common here, and I have colleagues who are not here today, many have sent in letters, but we all share as a body is we want the end of this to work for everybody. And we want it to essentially enhance the work you do, not be a limitation or a barrier to the work you do. And so, over the course of however long it takes to get this to the end and finish line, we'll continue to have sort of dialogue and feedback from folks that are in the field and where and what is happening that they need sort of access to. So that's just open and for folks to know, because I think you mentioned like that the start date's movable, right? We're talking about getting to a place that works more so than we're talking about a set in stone. This is when it has to be out the door. One of my questions for 11 Spoonfuls specifically, because you are such a provider of foods and you have contracts or agreements, however you term them, with partners, do you have any contracts with or partnerships in terms of the city of Boston specifically for food donation?
No, we do not.
Okay. And I'm assuming similarly?
No.
Okay. And then I think you've mentioned we've donated finances in some through ARPA, I think is how that money came there, but you've got money allocated and you got a freezer from the Office of Food Justice?
Yes, that's correct.
Fantastic. And
We're
hopefully
in the process of getting it.
Okay, great. So we got to get that. We got to get on that, the freezer. But in terms of your organizations, which do larger scale, New England focused, but very Boston focused, because 11 Spoonfuls actually is the provider of services to many of my neighborhood organizations. Do you have any government, City of Boston financial contracts at all? So like, in other words, you might not have a contract for goods, but are we supplementing, are we donating, are you getting a line item, are we giving you any operational resources at all?
I do not know that. I do not believe so. We do receive state funding and earmarks there, and we have in the past, I believe, received city funding, or at least conversations for earmarks, but I don't believe we are actively receiving any.
That's good for me to know. And then is your program receiving any similarly?
We do not have any contracts with the city of Boston, although Cambridge and Somerville both are providing ARPA funds and traditional budget funds to supplement our organization, because they know that we do a tremendous amount of work in the community. However, it's very hard to raise funds to do that.
Yep. And so in terms of the services that you provide, which I think are very in line with what we're trying to sort of do here, because you're talking about creating sort of perishable foods and freezing them and doing sort of a process for that, how much of that is getting into the city of Boston itself? How many of those meals, or how many folks from the city of Boston are going to where these are to get those meals? Do you keep track of that?
We do keep track of that. I don't have a list in front of me, but we do, our Heat and Eats program, we do definitely, Bunker Hill Community College, Roxbury Community College.
In Boston.
There's a number of other organizations that we provide these single-serve meals to each and every year. I can provide a list.
And I heard it from one of you, but I don't know if it was both of you. There's already some working relationships with the hospitals?
That was me, yes. We pick up donated hot food.
Yep.
While it's frozen for that program.
Perfect. And so it is something that the hospitals, or at least some of them, are already sort of actively looking at. I've had conversations, in full disclosure, with the Children's Hospital, and I'll have conversations sort of with the consortium of hospitals about what they're doing and how they're approaching that. But that food that they're providing, is it already prepackaged?
It is not. What we do is they flash freeze it.
Yep.
In the evening. We pick it up regularly through the week, and then we take that frozen food and then we kind of mix it up and put it into single-serve containers.
Okay, and then from an operational standpoint, are you guys dealing with refrigerated trucks, or is this like more of an Uber, like Grubhub? People are showing up in their own cars to pick this up. Like, how are you moving these amounts of sort of product?
We have refrigerated and freezer trucks that move the product from, let's say, Brigham and Women's or Emmanuel College here in Boston.
Yep.
We have a commercial kitchen on site at Biogen in Cambridge where we actually do the prepared meals.
Okay, fantastic. So basically you have one hub and then everything goes to the hub.
That's correct.
And then the transportation, is that contracted or is that volunteer?
The transportation, we have staff members that are truck drivers, but we do rely on hundreds of volunteers each and every week to actually package the meals.
Okay, and so one of the questions that I think will probably get parsed out, this is for my larger sort of distributors, is one of the reasons why I think the scope of this is going to change pretty dramatically is I think that in order for the yield to make sense to the effort and the money that goes into pickup, we have to have a certain ability to calculate this happens regularly and this happens in regularly this scale, which I think from a business to business perspective can differ wildly. But from these major institutions like Boston Public Schools, like our hospitals, like our colleges, like our grocery stores, they have a pretty good sense of what they have and when they have it and how that's working. I think we've had sort of some conversation, or it came in a letter. What is the current state of operationally? You have refrigerated trucks, you have drivers. If you had to scale that up to meet this need, is that currently a cost, the drivers and that on those trucks and the maintenance of those things, that is coming entirely out of the budgets of your independent organizations? Or is that something where there's some subsidy coming federally, state, or city? And is that something that would be sort of welcomed in terms of trying to figure out how we can maybe use city, state, federal funding to scale up those operations? One of the reasons I ask is sometimes when we're trying to do things like trauma response, which is a separate type of thing, what we get told is there's a certain threshold where when you put the money in, doesn't matter how much money you put into it, it takes a certain kind of person to do that kind of work, and so there's a point where it caps off and it doesn't matter, and because the need and the demand sort of hit, the need's always going to be a little bit higher and the demand is set. In terms of drivers and sort of the technology that you would need, is that something that you could scale up provided that you receive assistance, or there was some assistance with the scaling of that up? Or is there a point where there's just a shortage of drivers, or there's a shortage of what you would need to do that? So even if you scaled up to a certain degree, there would sort of be a cap.
I would say both and. I've had conversations with other food rescue organizations represented at this table, commiserating about the shortage of drivers. So that is something that we're facing as a world, as a country, and as a state. So commercial truck driving has definitely been difficult. But there is definitely a need, and I know we would be open to receiving that. We have received ARPA funding for different municipalities, and that is to support and kind of make the resiliency of that to not be a flash in the pan. So it's something that we're here and we're part of the community, we're part of the fabric of the social services, and these programs like Harvest on Vine and other organizations that you've mentioned, that they're here through different administrations, through different terms, and we're kind of there to be relied upon. There's been a lot of talk about the seasonality of farms, which are really wonderful. Schools are wonderful, it's great, but then there's the whole seasonal summer meals gap. So by creating the resiliency of different food sources like hospitals that are more year-round, that is really a wonderful fabric that can be relied upon by the folks who are needing it throughout the year, or maybe transitorily.
And I'll just add as context to the shortage of drivers that Sean mentioned, it's like a challenge, I think, universally in this work is, 11 Spoonfuls is internally seeking a broadened staff on the road to increase safety and really ensure that training and that safety element is there. And it's a challenge currently in the current situation. So I think it's a constant, it's really important that the staffing levels around that work are adequate to ensure the safety of the drivers as well as the people who are receiving the food and the training that goes into all of that. So,
So there would be sort of an on-ramp time that you guys would need. If this opened up to scale, there would be a time where you would absolutely need to staff up to a place where that would make sense, essentially, is what it sounds like. I guess one question for you, Tom, and then I'm going to go to Councilor Murphy, and then I'll come back with follow-ups. You mentioned that you had 175 families. That was last week?
Yes, last Tuesday.
So last Tuesday, you had 175 families. You started at how many?
In 2003, we started with 7 families.
So you've been going for 20 years.
Yeah, we're celebrating our 20th year. And we have over 700 families on our database. We're legally called an emergency food pantry. So a lot of families don't come. But for some families, the emergency never ends. They really do rely on us for food twice a month.
And a similar question, if you were provided more resources, do you think you would see an increase in families coming, or do you think there would be a situation? One of the things that I'm also contemplating in this process is, are we just changing where that food goes to waste? So in other words, if it goes to waste at the sort of the generator of it, or if they give it to us, so then we don't have the ability to get it out the door, or there is no demand for it, which I think there probably is demand, but I want to get that verified, where we're the ones now throwing it into a compost system, right? So I think the question is, if you got scaled up, do you think that there's a demand in your own, and have you been there for the entirety of that 20 years?
Yes.
Do you think that if you had more resources, you would have more folks coming? Is that like do you believe that that's there, or do you think that you'd tap out at 175?
I think that it depends on well, I would say more folks would come. During the pandemic, we really got busy, and we started giving out, for example, we give every family a half gallon of milk. We started giving them 2 half gallons. And the numbers went up, but I'm not sure if it was because we were giving more food or because of the pandemic. I do think this summer that when the EBT card gets reduced, I think our numbers are going to go way up. Somebody brought it up earlier. The other thing we started to provide are things like detergent, toilet paper, paper towels, because I'm pretty sure you can't buy those on your EBT card. So that's like
Ridiculous.
handing them cash in a sense, that they don't have to spend money on that. So we're trying to expand the types of things that we're giving, and to give our families as much income.
Yeah, and I
for their own
appreciate that work.
use that they, yeah. And I heard that rents are going up. So all these things add up to, usually a greater need.
And it sounds like even if there's not additional individuals, which I think you're saying there would be, there's also still, you're meeting the need, but then you can meet more of that individual's need if there's more available.
Yes, yeah. So we're giving out probably, we're giving each family, this is a guess, about 7 to 10 days worth of food.
And it's a weekly program or
about
monthly?
60 pounds worth, each distribution.
And you do every Tuesday, or is it once?
We do
a
it
month?
twice a month. We do it the last Tuesday of the month, which was the other day, and the second Saturday at 10 in the morning, so that if a family's working during the week, they can get their Saturday, vice versa. And a lot of families come to both.
That's very helpful information. Thank you. Councilor Murphy, I'm going to let you go now.
Just thank you for all you do, and there's so much involved, right, that I don't think a lot of people understand, so I do appreciate. One day I was with Miss Shirley, and it was on a Thursday where Work Inc., I'm not sure if you're familiar with that organization in Dorchester, but they employ, and the Loving Spoonful truck pulled up, and Justin was just so excited, and then I quickly saw that they have this like weekly relationship, and the driver was just so amazing, and I just feel like people who work in this field, like they just get it, right? They understand, and I love to take notes, but one thing I wrote down, someone said it like quality is dignity, and the food quality, but also just the way everyone, when I've gone to food pantries, the volunteers who are handing it out, or the people who are there all the time organizing it, or the truck driver who's employed by Loving Spoonfuls, who's, giving out, passing off the boxes to then carry into the food pantry is just so important. So I just appreciate that. One thing you talked about, and I appreciate you already know, like we have these food need in our public schools, and a lot of our people who go off to community colleges, they lose that, right? They lose that meal, and for some, we know maybe you have grants, or maybe you can afford the tuition. You oftentimes can't afford the textbook, and you definitely can't afford food if you're spending money on other things. So knowing that you're working closely with community colleges, and I know like the South Boston Health Center, I'm pretty sure they're the largest food distribution. They have a food pantry that has just grown exponentially over the years, and so many people in that community like rely on the health center's food pantry. So just knowing that anyone who's working in this space, the need's there and they're just stepping up. So just thinking about funds and line items and knowing that you're the organization that collects it and delivers it, but then you're the organization that gives it out. So there's just so many layers that are stepping up to make sure at the end of the day, like it's getting onto people's tables, it's getting into people's refrigerators. So no question, just thank you, and just know that I'm here for whatever we need to do to make sure that as a city, we're such a rich city, like what are we doing to make sure, and what policies are we working together to make sure our families have the dignity and the food they need and the healthy food. Because as we know, it's cheaper to do it this way. Kids who are having a healthy breakfast and not that sugar drink from the corner store are going to learn and are going to have a better day at school. I mean, it's just a cycle that we have to step in and make sure that we're supporting the organizations like yours who are providing such a need for our city. So thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. I'd like to see the city be more an active partner in actually giving food and assistance financially for some of our bigger partners in the city. I will just say one of the things that I expect and foresee is that a policy like this would lead to an increase in perishable food being donated. And it sounds like that is very much what you all work with. And so I have sort of two very specific things for both of you, which is I'm struck by the number of steps that it takes for Loving Spoonfuls to take a donation and then get that donation to its final destination, which would be a place like Tom. And so I guess my question is, as we do this, one of the things that I would like to minimize to its greatest extent is the additional burden of things that are going on our nonprofits or the folks that are doing the work, and shifting some of that burden, whether it's the sorting, whether it's what the quality should look like, what standards we have for what we're asking people to do, from a regulatory standpoint for folks who are donating. And so two separate things, which is when you're doing pickups or you're doing this through a volunteer sort of organization approach, which has been successful in the sense that you've scaled up and you are where you are and you're continuing to provide many, many, many millions of meals. I think the question that I have for you is, what are things that those partners that you kind of need them to do that they're voluntarily doing right now that make your job possible, that if we were to ask somebody to do this that has not been doing this, you would need them to do, that we could possibly codify, that they would have to do. So it's not a matter of their choosing when and if they do it, which right now everybody who's voluntarily doing it is doing it to make your jobs easier. But if we were to mandate this for somebody who has never done this, and we said an aspect of this that you absolutely, it would be great if you did, is this. I know some of the stuff that we would probably throw out there are things like refrigeration, what the temperatures of those foods are being kept at, those kinds of things. But I think we could probably tap into existing regulations and rules around food handling and things like that for that. So I would be looking into that. But what are things that you could all think of? And if the answer is we'd have to sort of think about that in a real way and come back to you at a later time, that's open as well. But are there things off the top of your head that we could sort of try to work into a codified regulation that would make it easier for the work that you do from a pickup standpoint and a delivery standpoint?
I can just take a little crack at this first. I think when I read the ordinance as written, and I understand that it's just a jumping off point, and I appreciate you stating that in the beginning, we currently don't have contracts for money from places like Harvard University or Boston University to pick up food. It would be very difficult for us as an organization to, as written in the ordinance, start having contracts with different agencies to do pickup that would require them to pay us. in terms of staff time, in terms of trying to even thinking about that is really difficult. We're a very small organization. We have 30 people. So trying to think about a way where if you're talking about shifting the burden from us onto a different entity, ensuring that there was funding there, perhaps from the city of Boston, rather than us entering into a bunch of different contracts with food donation providers, whether it's larger ones, smaller ones. I just think that the administrative burden of that would be very, very tricky for an organization like ours.
That makes a lot of sense. And so one of the things I'll say about why I picked sort of the golden geese there of BPS and government agencies are universities like Harvard, which you brought up with their $1 billion of endowment, with corporations. I'll tell you that corporations like Amazon, who have Whole Foods, have reached out. We've had other sort of very massive corporations that are very interested in this because there's a benefit to reputation, to them in the long run of doing this, and also to their credit because people do want to be of help. And so I think part of that is those institutions specifically have a financial ability, whether it's the government agency of the city of Boston, whether it's a university, whether it is a state entity, whether it is a major corporation, to shoulder some of that economic cost themselves. And I don't know that we can necessarily mandate that they do that, but I think we can create regulations that require that to sort of happen. And so there's ways to get to that will work out. You know, Harvard Law and Policy actually is one of the ones that will be sitting down with us to get to those language points. As far as the template of this, much of this was actually to look at, in terms of the sort of boiler language that we have here, a lot of it has to do with things that we've seen not work in other places and how we get around that. And then the goal has always been to take something that's more generalized and make it very Boston, New England specific to our user base and what that looks like, because there's different realities. And so we will have working sessions where pretty much everybody at this table will be invited to and go through sort of section by section what would make this stronger for you, what would make this less strong for you, what would operationally be needed on behalf of your organizations that you think is like a reasonable thing that you could achieve, and where would you need assistance. I think Councilor Murphy has brought up unions, which was not worked into this, but I think many unions would probably want to help in some way, shape, or form with this. But I think part of this is when you're mandating that things happen, I don't want the support structures to be voluntary, right? Because I'm mandating that you do, or we are mandating as a city that you do a certain thing, and then if everything that gets that thing done is based on voluntary assistance, then that's a recipe for eventually having gaps. And so I want to make sure we're looking at it, even if that means the scope and the scale is different. One of the things that I have tried to wrap my head around, and it sounds like, so for instance, with BPS, the meals that are already prepared are sealed already, they're already labeled. It sounds like actually what you guys are also doing is taking sort of pieces of meals, things that haven't been used or facilitated into a full meal, creating an actually healthy meal, and then individually packaging that, which is like several more steps removed, and actually gives me some hope about what this program could look like from a recovery sense, because it sounds like you already have created processes to do that.
We have, and we'd be happy to have you come and check it out.
I would love to do that, like from start to finish, if it's possible for me to get from pickup to where you get to the finished product. Because, you know, one of the logistical issues that I've been trying to work through, and it sounds like I probably, with some field visits, this might actually work out really nicely, is do we want to mandate all food, or do we want to make it clear that it has to be like sealed, packaged, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And it sounds like one of the things is we could increase the amount of donation that's actually usable and ethnically and culturally well done if we can create to scale your organization and organizations like yours. And if it's, I guess the question is what the work that you do, is the work that you do scalable?
Yes, and we are looking to scale it. We don't have enough donors. It's very difficult to get into a hospital or a university organization. There's so many layers you can imagine. We would love to be
working through them right now.
We would love to be picking up from all of the hospitals, from all of the universities. They have such good hot bar food in the dining halls where they literally take those, every single one of those containers, put it in a plastic bag, seal it, flash freeze it, and then we pick it up and then create those individual meals. As I said in my opening statement, we are oversubscribed in that program.
And you have about 30 staff who do this?
That's,
Or
well,
30 volunteers and
we have
staff?
30 staff in our organization total. We have one staff member that is in charge of this program, and the rest of it is all volunteer time.
And from just to better visualize what that looks like, in terms of what you're taking in to what you're putting out, what is the output of what you're taking in and how that translates into finished meals?
So if you can imagine going into a dining hall,
Yep.
and there's hot food everywhere, mashed potatoes, chicken, vegetables, that all gets put into individual bags, frozen. Then we bring it to the Biogen commercial kitchen. And then we have volunteers who actually chip away at the frozen food, put it into like almost like a TV
Yep, dinner
TV meal
packaging.
tray. Yeah.
Yep.
And then we have a sealer that goes on top, and we have a sticker that says exactly what's in it. And then those meals just get sent out to our partner agencies. So Bunker Hill Community College and Roxbury Community College have a freezer that we've provided for them for students. Many of our Cambridge Public Schools also have a freezer that, families know that they can come in if they need a meal. They can grab however many people in their family. And it is scalable. It's just...
It sounds like it's mostly refrigeration in terms of like freezing.
It's
It's mostly
mostly-
having it frozen.
Yes, it's all frozen, and that's where that cold chain kind of comes into play.
Yeah, and so it sounds like a lot of what we would be scaling, and we've had conversations, at least internally, about Loving Spoonfuls has refrigerated trucks, and if we're increasing perishable goods, largely what's really incumbent on that is refrigeration and freezer capacity. And so I think that's something that, this is me openly asking, whether you're here or you're watching, ways in which we can do that to scale for what we're trying to do. And then I think one of the things that I would ask you all to think about is what is a believable scale that you could reach, that you would say, we think this is good. Like, we're here, we can get it wherever that is, here, whatever that is internally, and then working from that. What our biggest and sort of most successful food recovery programs are operating here. They believe that if we did this, they could get here, and then we work from there from what we're trying to regulate, so that we're not going way above that and we're not coming under what you think is an acceptable amount of growth potential. And then adjusting as necessary as it becomes more traditional, as these hospitals realize the benefits to them to doing this, as these things come online. I really believe that when things work, people want to do them. And one of the things that's really special, you sort of hit it on the head, is that the folks who really get served are the volunteers who do this. And I really do believe that once partners see the good that this does, it's not going to be a burden as much as it's going to be, as far as regulations go, a regulation that they actually brag about. Most people don't brag about the fact that they wash their hands. I mean, that's not, they might put the sign up, but that's not something they're bragging about to their customers. It's a given, but I think many of these organizations will be very happy to brag about how many meals they've provided and how they use their food waste, especially in today's environment, and especially for our for-profit partners. And so part of this is creating something that is very much an asset for your organizations, because your organizations facilitate that process. I think the end goal is to make sure that they get to organizations like Tom and to the end users specifically who need them. And I think if we're talking about logistically how we get there, and you can correct me on this because you've done this work, it feels like the most complicated aspect of this is both the sorting, the transportation, and the storage. Those sort of the three things there. And then it becomes much easier when those things get into Tom's hands to give to individuals and to sort of scale there. But it's the complication in, are we receiving quality food? Is that food to standard? Or is it healthy food? Is it good food? Which I think falls into quality food, but are folks doing what they're supposed to be doing? How do we get it from point A to point B? And how do we do that without the quality of that food diminishing? And I think those sort of operational issues are the ones that I'm focused on. And because we would be relying largely on you all to do sort of that, I think it's really important that you all lead on what you believe is a reasonable, believable, achievable thing to codify. And then I think its success will breed more success, frankly. It's similar to how Loving Spoonfuls went from what it was to what it was, how you went from what you were to what you were, and same thing. I think success scales. And so those are kind of the thoughts that I'm thinking through as we get to where we're going to go. this matters to me. This isn't some flash in the pan thing that we're going to get a couple headlines, then it's going to disappear. This is coming, and it's coming with your partnership. It's not coming over your heads. It's not coming around you. It is going to come very much with you all having ridden something in this, frankly. And so what I'm very interested in is scaling. How do we scale it? How do we fund it? I think, the city makes a lot of decisions on how we spend our money. And just based on the need that I receive on my phone calls, the fact that we wouldn't prioritize food and food access and how we do that, frankly, is ridiculous. I'll give you an example. We have a park in Rosendale, that's a little community park, and the neighbors want to turn it into a food forest because they believe that people actually use the food that comes out of that food forest. And so there's a very real need for this, and I think that government needs to play a role in making this happen and pushing us in that direction. And this country, specifically in this state, is not at where Milan or where many of the France is at. But I do think that we won't get there unless we start here, right? And so, very much not so much a question for now, because I think all of you would have to sort of go back to your partners and see how you could do that. But I want to get to a place where I believe that scaling up is a part of actually creating the need to scale up. So creating that need, but then also what is a healthy amount of scaling where you guys believe we could get there, and this is the amount of time we would need to get there, but this is what we would need in this to make that functional. And specifically with what your organization does, from what I think we would get, I think we'd get shelf-stable foods as part of this as well, because it's not saying that we wouldn't. But I think what we would get an increase in is sort of more perishable foods. And it sounds like your organization has really taken a real strong base and foundation on how to deal with that. As a question for you, when it comes to transportation to end, so for instance, you transport all of these things frozen to this hub facility. Is it the same transportation hub that is then moving it to the end user, or is there sort of two separate chains? There's a chain that gets it from the hospitals and from your partners to you, and then there's a separate chain that gets the finished product to where it's going, or is it the same drivers and the same cars and the same trucks?
It's the same type of truck. It may be a different driver.
Obviously.
We have several refrigerated and freezer vans that do the work of transporting the frozen material.
Okay, and so it's not always necessarily a truck, sometimes it's a refrigerated van or something?
Sometimes it's a refrigerated van, yep.
And for you, what is your current fleet in terms of, not necessarily by number, but in terms of, is it mostly vans and trucks? Is there more trucks than van, more van than truck?
More trucks than vans, and shifting more towards trucks as being a more reliable source for us.
Okay, and when you say trucks, because there's many sizes of trucks, what is there a sort of...
How specific do you want to get there? 12-foot Isuzu NPRs, which are medium-duty trucks.
So that's like more of the U-Haul...
Precisely.
Single apartment size. Yes.
Yeah, and they're all refrigerated vehicles.
Mostly I'm trying to figure out from a city scale, if we require the city to do this, that's more trucks on the streets. And so are we talking about larger trucks that would require much larger loading docks, or are we talking about more manageable vans and sort of what you would see normally on the city streets, like a U-Haul?
And I think this is one of the logistical challenges that we, I'm sure, face the same type of things. Ben and I have had many conversations working with Tom, working with Carl, who's in the gallery right now. It's the logistics of sorting are really important, but also the logistics of matching the sources of the food with where it's going. And we don't know what we're going to get from a store. So if we go to a specific food vendor, if it's a hospital, if it's a supermarket, we don't know if they have over-ordered 20 cases of bananas. Mm-hmm. And if they do, one partner does not want 20 cases of bananas. So to not force it upon them, to have it a relationship that's built on trust and mutual respect and conversation, they might say, we just got bananas from the food bank because they also got 20 shipments. Mm-hmm. We don't want any bananas. And they need to feel comfortable to tell whoever's sourcing to them that doesn't work. Because by us delivering it to them or dumping it on them, not only would it be detrimental to their program, they would have to then pay for it to be removed, but also you're removing it from a vendor that could potentially put it into other disposal streams, composting, because a lot of our nonprofit partners don't have composting on that size of a scale. But more importantly, there's the dignity aspect of things. It's been touched on a lot. You know, the fact that if we were to start seeing dumping of food on programs, and it's a mandate that you must take all of these things, you must take all the food from this store at this one partner, the overall perception of food rescue might be seen as lesser than. So the administration had brought out a really great point to kind of embrace the education for everybody, those who currently might not be needing sources of food, but that's okay to be accessing this type of this rescued food. But then for those same programs to be able to push back. And there's a program on Cummins Highway in your district. It's a local church. They pretty recently told us very clearly they do not want cottage cheese because they think it's nasty.
Sorry to the cottage cheese enthusiasts.
So, those are the types of micro conversations that only come with real relationships.
Yeah.
They feel comfortable telling us, listen, our population is mostly Haitian Creole, and most of our clients do not take the cottage cheese, and that is the one thing that, to Tom's point, that the proof is in the pudding. You see it, it's on the table at the end of the day, that's not going there. So
And is that just really briefly on that kind of a communication, is that something that you were talking about training drivers to sort of have, is that a conversation they're having with your drivers, or are they calling directly to like some customer service person, like your community relations person about, hey, this is the Cummins Highway spot and you guys brought us this, or is that a message that really is dependent entirely on the relationship that your driver is building with who they're dropping things off with?
both?
I witnessed this firsthand recently, riding along with our drivers. They hold an enormous amount of information in their heads every day. Our trucks are, we're carrying primarily perishable stuff, not prepared food, but that food has to go out that day. We don't have storage. And the drivers are calculating as food is coming onto the truck, which partner will want this, which partner will not want this. They know this place likes croissants and this place likes sweet potatoes. They have that information and they field those questions. They are the folks on the ground. They are facing our partners more than anybody else. And they carry all of that information in their head every day to make sure that the trucks are full, and then by the end of the day, they're empty again, and the partners have all of that food. So
And that they're empty in a way where that food reached the person who wanted it.
yeah.
Which is an endeavor. But this all makes me think about, I know Toast has talked to you about it, Toast has reached out to us as well about how we maybe create processes of information sharing, because I'm not sure, you raised an interesting point, which is the Greater Boston Food Bank just sent somebody else bananas, right? And is there a point where, how siloed is that? So in other words, when Greater Boston Food Bank is giving food to individuals and Loving Spoonfuls is giving food to partners, and there's some overlap, I'm sure, in those partners, how siloed is the information about what Greater Boston Food Bank is providing as opposed to you, and how much of that information are you allowed to build? So you guys are bringing all these fruits and vegetables so we can bring them these things, then we can use the fruits and vegetables somewhere else. How much of that information are you getting directly from those partner organizations? And how much of that is simply because the individual who's receiving from both is sort of tasked with relaying that information to you if you're trying to see if they want something?
More the relaying in real time, because there's,
So it's not like the partner organizations aren't necessarily communicating about what they're providing or what they've taken in a lot of or what they haven't taken in a lot of in that particular moment.
Well, it depends. Sometimes you'll know. Often we're not a direct food bank partner ourselves, but we have an MOU with them, and they're a great community partner for the region and the city, especially. But we know often when different programs receive their food bank deliveries, and we know that kind of ebbs and flows that might contain. So Tom just received a whole freezer full of chicken from the food bank. So we typically know on the first of the month, some program is going to receive that delivery from the food bank, so they might take less on that day. But it is still just that open conversation where maybe they have chicken, but they want other sources of lean protein that we might have available. But the personal conversations and relationships are really important. There's the stability and the consistency that we're going to be creating with the folks that we're providing food to, because often we're not providing people who are food insecure themselves. We're not serving individuals in our program. We're serving, volunteers, which might also be recipients of the pantry, but they're the ones that are going to relay that trust with their clients. So it's a ladder of trust that needs to be built and kind of maintained with consistency and continuity.
And I would just say Food for Free operates a little bit differently because we actually do a transportation partnership with the Greater Boston Food Bank for most of our recipients who are also getting fresh produce, recovered produce at the same time.
And so Greater Boston Food Bank would sort of keep track of what you're giving them, so they sort of have all of that information as they're...
So we pick up a pallet of food from the Greater Boston Food Bank that is going to one of our food pantries.
Got it.
And then we also drop off any rescued food that goes along with it.
And so that way you're not double...
Correct. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. That's very smart. One of the things that came up that I think might be something that I don't believe is in what we've written, but might be something worth exploring, is you brought up right of refusal. And I think it might be an interesting aspect to write into this, that there's a right of refusal from the partner organizations as to whether or not they want to take something on that given day or at that time. I think that might get to some of the issues about you can compost it and they can't, and we know we're not going to be able to use it this week or this month, or it's just not an appropriate thing for us to take. And that way they're not sort of like, well, no, you have to come grab this, right? So I think there's ways we can work that language in, but that's the kind of thing that I think we can get sort of regulatory about, where it takes some of that burden off of you, which is the right to refuse an order. And I think one of the things we can try to trigger is if there's a right for refusal because they're simply not giving you good things, then that triggers a separate thing. But if it's right for refusal because it's voluntary, right, then, because one of the things with the right to refusal, just as we write policy, these are the kinds of things that you have to go through. One of the things about right to refusal is it doesn't stop, and if you have that in there, an organization can let everything go bad because they're trying to do whatever they're trying to do and then say, well, oh, you didn't want it, right? And so I think we have to create protections for when it's an intentional thing where they're not giving you what you should be getting and then you're refusing it every time or refusing it many times because it's not what it's supposed to be on the part of that partner, and then other times when it's really just because of a number of different reasons that might exist from an operational standpoint for our nonprofits. But I think the trust for me on that in terms of who should have the right to refusal is very much our partners who are trying to feed people. And so those are the kinds of creative sort of language things that we can put into this. I think that's like an interesting thing that you said that I think we could work into this to make it more manageable as well, where just because they're mandated to do it doesn't mean that the organizations are mandated to take it. And then that's sort of, as long as there's an understanding that the reason it didn't happen is because the organization didn't want to take it on that day or that load or that shipment or that week, that then it's cleared, right? And so the ways to make it so that it's not like, well, what do I do now, right? Do I get fined because you didn't want to take it? I think there's ways to work through all that make this very functional. So I appreciate all of you. I want to give you a chance to close. If there's anything specifically, many of you were really prescriptive, and I want to thank folks who weren't present who wrote very detailed letters about things that they also saw or flagged, some of it which overlaps with this, some of it was separate and apart, but also with the reiteration that every first ordinance is really just a draft and it's written in pencil. And so when we get to the finish line of this, I fully expect that many of you will have been in, or your organizations will have been in many a conversation with us about what that language looks like to most be a benefit to you, frankly, because a benefit to you is a benefit to our end user. And I think that's a really important thing to center. And so if there's any closing on anything specifically that you would like to say, then please know that you have the floor now, any and all of you, to do so before I adjourn.
I think I'll just say thank you for looping us in here. You know, I think we are here as a resource and want to be that moving forward. And I think we're all on the same page here that it's the end user that's the most important element, the most important person in this conversation. So we are very happy to work on this moving forward.
Thank you so much. I do think we have some community comments, so I want to make sure we go to it. You are welcome to stay and hear community comments, not many people, or you are free to go if you have other commitments. I just want to make sure really quickly. I know we have 2 on Zoom. Is one of these in person? Yeah. So I'm going to take the person who's been here, Carl Beatty. Thank you, Carl. Either one of those mics. And Carl Beatty is here with Rounding the Bases, Inc. So you just pull that mic up. And whenever you're ready, I usually have a timer, but because we only got 3, there is no timer, so you take your time, sir.
Good afternoon, and I really thank you for the invitation. I'd like to thank my partners, Loving Spoonfuls. I'm Carl Beatty. I'm the Executive Director of Rounding the Bases, a small nonprofit that tries to connect people to resources. In 2015, the city started a food delivery program. See, the elderly commission at that time, age strong now, but they piloted a food delivery program. We were that pilot. They didn't want the seniors to have to come out the house to go get food. So what the program was once a month, I would go to ABCD in Mattapan, pick up 3 brown bags and take them to 3 seniors. And the first time I showed up there, they told me, said, well, you got to bring your seniors. Because they got to sign up. So I went and got the seniors, brought them to them there, and they signed up. Well, we grew that program from 3 seniors to pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, we had we serving 40 households a week. The brown bags were canned goods, which is sodium, and a lot of pasta, rice, starch. Our people had the highest rates of hypertension and diabetes, so that wasn't good. So we knew we needed to get fresh fruits and vegetables for them. First farm I contacted was Urban Farming Institute. They were the black farm. I knew if I could land them, I could leverage them to land others. Now, even if I had to shame them into it, I'd do it. Man, that's what I needed. And they agreed. Pre-COVID, we were right about that level, and the city called me and told me, said, you're not going to be able to see your clients. I'm sorry, I can't do that. Well, we don't want to be responsible. Look, you gave me 3. I got over 40 now. I can't do that. No, I thank God. I didn't get sick, and none of the people I served got sick. We took what precautions we could, but you tell the senior stay in the house and you take the food away from them. Didn't make sense to me. Our people had food with these vegetables, and pretty much over the summer. What do you do with the cold months? Well, thank God for Loving Spoonfuls. Last year, and I got my laptop, I got that sheet with me. Last year, on a bad week, we served over 200 households. On a bad week, we served over 200 households. On a good week, our best week, we served over 600. My point of being here is one, nobody ever thought I wanted to replace him if he do something like this. So I was going to take the opportunity. And my partners invited me. And if they thought enough for me to invite me, I have to show up. I don't want to. I don't know what the plan is, but I don't want to see anything that doesn't hurt anybody. It's people out there that need the food, and believe me, I see a lot of them. Small organization, but you're looking at the organization. I got volunteers from Amy Street Senior Building to help me, but you're looking at the organization now. I'll say this and I shut up. I went homeless November 14th. November 14th last year, and none of my programs shut down. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. I believe on Zoom, we have Sandra Nijar, who is the founder of the East Boston Neighborhood Soup Kitchen, was supposed to be a panelist today, but had a prior commitment and might be able to offer public comment, which would essentially be her opening. Is she on? She's not on yet? Okay. We do have Dana Siles on. Dana Siles is on to give public comment. She's a partner over at Rescuing Leftover Cuisine.
Hi, everybody. Can you
Hello,
hear me?
we see you. Yeah, we see you and we hear you.
Wonderful. It's wonderful to be here. It really is. And I want to thank you, all of you who are here for this ordinance, for being here, for everything you do. Just an incredible opportunity. So on behalf of Rescuing Leftover Cuisine, a national nonprofit food rescue organization operating here in Boston, we would like to express our very deep gratitude to all of you here today for proposing this ordinance to propel food recovery movement here in Boston. We also want to thank our friend food rescue organizations for doing such important work here, like 11 Spoonfuls, Food for Free, Boston Area Gleaners, and others. It was wonderful to hear from Carl, who we've worked with. I look forward to hearing from Sandra, who we work with. It's just a great community. So Rescuing Leftover Cuisine believes that excess food marks a new beginning, not an end. We crowdsource community members as volunteer and paid rescuers who use our purpose-built web application to redistribute quality surplus food, mostly prepared and unprepared, from businesses to nonprofits that serve people who face food insecurity at no cost to them. In a nutshell, you could compare our network to a rideshare platform for food. Since 2013, just to give a little bit of context, RLC has redistributed over 10 million pounds of food nationally. This includes over 985,000 pounds of food from 184 businesses to 143 nonprofit organizations throughout Massachusetts, mostly in Greater Boston, since 2016. And this has been achieved by over 900 rescuers, like I said, volunteer and paid rescuers, via over 18,500 rescue events, providing over 821,000 meals that may have otherwise been discarded necessarily. Though they do this by making no stops in between the donor and recipient organization, on foot, bicycles, standard-sized vehicles, and trucks, allowing us to distribute food to organizations of all sizes, including those in hard-to-reach areas. RLC matches food donations from our partners to organizations based on specific criteria, such as schedule, geography, capacity, and other logistics, such as cultural, religious, and nutritional needs and preferences, to serve our organizations and their food recipients with compassion and dignity, which has been very much highlighted throughout this conversation, and that's beautiful. Our business partners include eateries, commercial kitchens, businesses hosting catered events, venues, markets, manufacturing facilities, warehouses, distribution centers, and more. We make it easy for businesses to donate surplus food with no minimum requirement of food for pickups, and equipping them with an online dashboard to schedule pickups, measure social and environmental impact, access real-time metrics, and download food donation receipts for ease of reporting and eligibility of federal tax benefits. As an organization with extensive experience operating in Greater Boston, we're thrilled about the spirit of this proposed ordinance. And as mentioned, casually during this hearing, while we do not support its passage as currently written, it's obviously an invaluable starting point towards the creation of an effective food recovery strategy for the city. We believe that prior to its passage, the strategy must include deep consideration of elements that have been touched on today, such as the EPA food recovery hierarchy, prioritization of food safety and handling, thoughtful procedures for equitable food distribution, city and statewide policies, funding, and also the roles of the Office of Food Justice and other vital elements to ensure a unified strategy and long-term effectiveness to divert food from landfills and serve people who face food insecurity. We aim to work alongside our fellow food recovery organization constituents and the Office of Food Justice and have some ideas about how the city may be able to implement a successful citywide strategy that would identify bottlenecks and opportunities to reduce gaps, overlap, and repetition to maximize collective impact per every dollar. Our ideas include funding our organizations, each of our organizations, in strategic ways that would help bring out the best of each of us to offer uniquely, that we offer uniquely. So for example, RLC's utilization of modern technology, so that we may strengthen the food system collectively and also strengthen policies to significantly expand food donation. So as an example, the state of Massachusetts does not offer current additional tax incentives or credits beyond the federal incentives that are offered. And dollars spent on water, energy, and labor invested to produce discarded food goes to waste. But if it's donated instead of discarded, that tax credit could help offset that. So supporting businesses that do the right thing would encourage others to do the same. And by incentivizing businesses to donate unused food, the state of Massachusetts has the opportunity to support local businesses, support local nonprofit organizations, increase food equity, extend the life of the landfills, and preserve the environment. It's literally a win-win-win-win-win. This hearing is such a defining and exciting moment for the city of Boston and for the state of Massachusetts, and it has ignited vital conversations to propel a highly impactful and efficient and sustainable food recovery ecosystem in Boston, and one that could serve as a foundation throughout Massachusetts and even our country, which is so exciting. It also comes at a great time, so we may all leverage the momentum of the White House National Strategy, the January 2023 passage of the Food Donation Improvement Act of 2021, and the Mass DEP 2030 Solid Waste Master Plan. And I will end by saying, ultimately, the long-term success of this incredible effort will be fueled by our collective mission to end wasted food, protect our environment, and solidify food security. We look forward to the opportunity to be a part of this incredible ongoing conversation to help enhance the ordinance for passage, to ensure the success it deserves, and achieve sustainability and food justice, which Boston deserves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll make sure to rope you into as well as we're starting to put together sort of our think tanks on how to get this to its best of its ability. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I think we've been joined by Sandra Needjar and her partner there, Arlene. We can cue them up. Good afternoon, Sandra.
Okay. Good afternoon, Councilor Arroyo. Thank you so much for including us. We are running around here, running errands for the soup kitchen. This is Arlene Olivero.
Hey, Arlene, great to see you both. I know you both are literally in the field right now. So I appreciate that we have you here in this capacity, at least to speak to your needs and what you do and what your work is. Usually we have a timer. It's just you and then a video from the Greater Boston Food Bank that, since that video is pre-recorded, you have the time you need to go ahead and say whatever you would like to say.
We would like to first thank you for including us in this conversation. I think passing this ordinance to be able to rescue food from different businesses will help organizations like ours, grassroots nonprofit organizations that address food insecurity in our community of East Boston. Each Monday, we are taking care of our homeless who come in for hot meals. But because we're not giving out hot meals, we give them hot meal vouchers, coupons that they take to restaurants, and then they get a hot meal. Partner organizations like Rescue Leftovers, Dana, they have been amazing partners of ours helping us with that effort. And then Loving Spoonfuls and Food for Free and many others have been helping us. And also Shaw's Supermarket have been giving us surplus foods to be able to fill bags of groceries on Tuesdays. And on Tuesdays, we take care of a long line of people of all walks of life, basically, like all ages, all ethnicities, coming and standing in line for hours, waiting for a bag of groceries. And those bags of groceries are filled with foods that are rescued, that are donated to us each week. So passing an ordinance, the one that you are pushing for or that you're filing for, it's going to help us a great deal because right now we leave people without food because we don't have enough donations. So I'm not sure if I'm missing anything else, Arlene.
Yeah, sure. I mean, unfortunately, after the pandemic, people might think that the food insecurity is like something that maybe would disappear a little more, but it's actually growing, and we see it every week how the line gets bigger. And before it was like until like not so far, and now it's like all the way to the end of the street. So like it's hard to see that, and it's hard to get the resources to fulfill people's needs right now. So yeah, that's something that you missed to say, how like the line grows and grows every week, and it's just too much for us to deal with.
Yeah, and that, the food is not culturally sensitive also, and there is a lot of food waste that happens here too. So we go around collecting the food that is rejected, such as canned goods. Not many people are used to consuming, food that is processed. So to have fresh food, vegetables, and proteins, it's something that we need more of. So if supermarkets have meats and vegetables that, because they don't look so fresh, they want to throw it away instead of giving it to us, that's sad, because there are people that could easily consume that food.
So I have two questions. You were supposed to be on our panel, so that's why I'm going to ask you some questions. It's not normal for us to ask public commenters questions. But Sandra, you run the East Boston Soup Kitchen. So I have two questions for you. One is, how many people are you serving on a regular basis? Are you keeping track of that in terms of how many meals or prepared sort of bags you're getting out on each day?
Okay, so we are open 2 separate days, taking care of 2 separate populations. So Mondays, we take care of our homeless, and we are helping between 50 to 75 homeless folks. To them, we give them hot meal vouchers for now, but starting May 16th, we will go back to the indoor dining. But so that's with our homeless. And then on Tuesdays, that is very different, because we are giving out bags of groceries. We operate more as a food pantry, and we give out 400 bags of groceries, which the YMCA from Greater Boston YMCA donates to us, but we also finish filling it with all these other foods that we receive from other donors, like Loving Spoonfuls and Food for Free and Shaw's and many others. And then, so that's 400 bags, but then we also have between 50 to 75 boxes that also go with that. And then we have about 250 to 300 bags of fresh vegetables that also go with that. And then the families, the people that are standing line is between 350, varies. It could be 200, it could be 300, but it never really goes lower than 150. So, yeah.
So then I have a second question, which is one of the things that I think this ordinance would, I think it would create more of both, but I think the thing that it would create much more of is what we would consider perishable food that would have to be consumed relatively quickly. Do you think that you have a market for that? So if you received more perishable food that would have to have been consumed that day or very soon to that day, do you think that you have folks who would be interested in that, or you'd be able to deal with that, or would that just be food that's going to waste?
Yes, we can. We can take it. We've been taking those types of foods from Loving Spoonfuls and other places, and including Shaw's. We know that some of the food that is expired, but because they have a certain amount of time after expiration, that it's safe to consume.
Date. Yeah, it's sell by date, not expiration date.
Save by date, or yeah. So we do take expired food. We try not to, but if it's food that is expiring within a couple of days, yeah, people definitely take it because they consume it immediately.
So I'm talking less about expired food and more like prepared food that might have been like in a food court, or might be like a school lunch or a hospital meal, like something that's already cooked, not something that... Would you have a market for that specifically?
We will have a market for that on Mondays, not for Tuesdays.
So
for Mondays, yes, it would be for our homeless, because we will be providing hot meals to them, so they can take that with them in their snack bags. We create snack bags that we give out sometimes with backpacks, and we put in food and a drink and a shake and whatever else we can we can put in there for them to have later on.
And then if some of those things were frozen, so if we were able to create some kind of thing around freezing them or having them frozen, would then the Tuesday crowd be able to take it if it was something that was refrigerated, like something they could refrigerate and eat at a later time, even if it was already prepared?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So thank you, Sandra. I don't know if there's anything you want to add before we go to this video.
No, just thank you.
Thank you.
for
I know
filing
you're running
this
around doing
ordinance.
this work, so thank you so much to you for all you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, and so I think the final thing we have is video testimony from Kate Adams from the Greater Boston Food Bank, which is, because it's a pre-recorded video, it's got about a 5-minute runtime. So then we'll go to that. And then that is it. Then we will adjourn. And I thank, again, everybody who's watched this, who is watching this. These are saved on our YouTube channel. So if folks want to, I sound like my very elderly father when I called it YouTubes, but on our YouTube channel. So if you would like to see this YouTube video or any of the other hearings that we hold, you're welcome to do it. But for our organizations, if somebody would like you to tell them what we spoke about, you can actually cut to clips and have that. This is preserved. So with that, if we can press play on Kate Adams' video testimony.
Hello, my name's Kate Adams, and I am the Public Policy Manager at the Greater Boston Food Bank. Thank you, Councilors Arroyo and Coletta, for extending an invitation for us to participate in this community panel today. The Greater Boston Food Bank is the largest hunger relief organization in New England and among the largest food banks in the country. As the food bank for Eastern Massachusetts, we are feeding people in 190 towns across the region, distributing food through a network of 600 dedicated food distribution partners and programs. These include food pantries, meal sites, and soup kitchens. We have 131 Boston area partner food distribution agencies that serve hundreds of thousands of people every month. We are delighted that the Boston City Council is addressing food insecurity and sustainability concerns through the Boston Food Recovery Program proposal. We have a long history of addressing food waste through food recovery programming, and we support the city's efforts at exploring solutions to these challenges through stakeholder feedback, and we're happy to participate in the process. I'd like to provide some context about our role in the edible surplus food arena. The Greater Boston Food Bank had a retail food recovery program since 2009. When it first launched, we worked with only 2 retail partners. Today, through dedication and strategic partnerships, we've grown the program to work with 43 retail partners in Boston that donate to 27 Boston-based agency food pantry partners. About a quarter of the total food that the Greater Boston Food Bank distributes across Eastern Massachusetts is donated food, thanks in part to this program. According to Feeding America's food safety standards, we cannot accept prepared food without clearly labeled common allergies listed. As such, the Greater Boston Food Bank and its network of food pantry partners in Boston likely would not be able to accept surplus edible food that's generated through this ordinance unless it is from large wholesale vendors and grocery stores, many of which we already partner. Though GBFB itself cannot accept most rescued prepared food, we have a longstanding partnership and memorandums of understanding detailing our operational commitments with several food recovery organizations in the Boston area, like Love & Spoonfuls, Boston Area Gleaners, and FoodLink, to name a few, who distribute food to 33 of our Boston-based partner agencies. While most of our Boston area agencies express the need for more food, some have limited storage capacity for perishable products and hot meals that would be generated through this program. Also, many have limited capacity to retrieve and transport recovered food. Adequate infrastructure support for organizations receiving surplus food must be considered for this proposal to be successful. We'd like to share a few considerations and questions about the proposal. Who will be accountable for maintaining adequate food safety standards of recovered food and ensuring refrigeration of food throughout the following cold chain stages? Storage of food ready to be donated, at pickup, during transportation, during delivery. And how will this be regulated? Will regulation be based on volumes of food that the generators produce or volumes received by the food distribution organizations? Some smaller organizations may not be able to absorb added reporting and administrative duties. Do organizations receiving the donated food have capacity to coordinate delivery of food? How will this be determined and/or provided? The Greater Boston Food Bank, as well as many other industries, are currently experiencing shortages of truck drivers. Recruitment may be challenging, just a consideration. This program may add traffic and congestion, with trucks needing to double park for pickup and drop off in the Boston area. Some destinations may not have loading docks. How have Tier 1 generators adapted to comply with the state food waste ban? To what end is their excess edible food going currently? Will there be capacity funding from the city provided for emergency food providers to operationally administer the program? This proposal is a bold step toward finding innovative solutions to the complex and interconnected challenges of food waste and hunger in Boston. We applaud the Boston City Council for moving this conversation forward and encourage further examination of the current efforts around emergency hunger relief providers to address food waste and determine feasibility of this proposal in collaboration with food waste reduction and hunger relief stakeholders to explore solutions to the challenges raised, namely around capacity, accountability, and regulation. Thank you.
Thank you. Even though you're a video, you sent that in yesterday. We have Royal Smith from the Boston Black Hospitality Coalition, who came in right before the deadline. Royal Smith, if you are prepared to give a statement, your floor is yours, co-founder of the Boston Black Hospitality Coalition.
Hey guys, first of all, I apologize for my lateness and tardiness in the conversation, but yes, my name is Royal Smith. I'm the co-founder of the Boston Black Hospitality Coalition, in addition to the owner of District 7 Tavern, community guy, and know that this policy is important and it's moving in the right steps to ensure to mitigate food waste. And you know, we see it every day here in Roxbury. You know, just look outside, and know that moving forward, you know, and know that we're involved in a lot of policy happening with the different restaurants that will be coming to our cities, in our squares within the next couple of years. Restaurants play an important role, an important part of this conversation, and know that we're here and we want to help. So anything that we can do, let us know. This is important, and it goes back to my roots. You know, as a kid, my grandfather was was very integral in the Fair Foods Project, and they're still running today under the direction of Nancy. And those lines are just getting longer and longer and longer and longer. So whatever we can do, you know, to move this forward, let me know, let the team know, and we can go from there. Thanks.
Thank you. Really appreciate community input on this. Again, want to thank all of our partners. This is the beginning of a conversation, not the end point or midpoint of this conversation. So there are many aspects of this that we will be taking into account. I do really believe that everybody has some piece of this puzzle that we will be putting together and some insight on how that particular piece can be better, sheened up, polished up, and made to be more effective. And so the goal is to get this done. I'm very grateful for folks who have been working in this field of sort of collecting salvageable food for decades and frankly, without, in my opinion, appropriate government support. And so it is my hope that this will codify that this is not an optional thing that the city does every now and again when somebody decides that they kind of like that as a policy or it looks good, but rather a consistent framework for how the city of Boston views food and its residents and their needs, and how food and access to food is a public good that should not be barred by any number of considerations. I recognize that what we are trying to do is hard. If it weren't, it would have been done already. And so we will do all of the things necessary to make this as solid a final product as we can. But I truly do believe that everyone here wants the same exact things, and that makes this so much easier to get to that end goal because everyone is really seeking to help people in the most vital, essential way that you can do that, which is providing a literal human need to survive. And so in the ways in which we can make this work for everyone, we will, just on record and publicly, if the folks who bear a greater burden on this are folks who can afford it, our corporations and our well-endowed universities and our government agencies, well, then that's where that's going to go. And so just publicly, no hiding the ball here. That's who's going to carry a lot of the burden if we can do that, because I believe that this is an appropriate burden because, frankly, when we are talking about food waste, we are talking about food that should be going to people to eat, and the fact that we have people who are hungry while we are simultaneously throwing away perfectly edible, perfectly serviceable food feels criminal, even though it isn't. And so the quickest and fastest way to get to that is to regulate, and as many people know, regulations can create some new burdens on corporations and on businesses, and the idea here is to strike the right balance so that it is not crippling to them, it is not creating a situation where they're not able to operate or provide the services that they're able to provide, but they're still doing well and right by the public. And I think how we treat food and how we treat the end consumer of food, salvaged food, has to be something that we prioritize in this way. We have not codified this, even though we have codified other things, like, for instance, many of the urban farming things that we are trying to create, like, for instance, we're working on beekeeping and things of that nature, but we haven't codified things of the importance and to the level of how people who need food and have limited resources to access that food are able to do so, and how the partners who have really been holding the wall up for us and making sure that need gets met, get the services from the city that they should be getting, and frankly, how we should be doing our own part, even if we step away from sort of corporate to nonprofit to all of that. The city has its own amount of food waste generation, frankly, that is quite large, and what we do with that and how we deal with that personally, and how we have no contracts to even try to ascertain how to deal with that with our private nonprofit world that does this work, is concerning. And so in ways in which we can rope in those responsibilities and make them sort of something that we have to do, that is the goal of this. And so, I look forward to building something that everybody's proud of when this is all said and done, and that serves the greater good for long after I'm done here, and folks here have moved on to different things if they so choose, so that 20 years from now, your agency is going even stronger. So grateful to everybody, and with that, I am going to adjourn. So we are adjourned. We get nice gavels when we're